Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that smells like hearth smoke, old parchment, and bread so dense it could double as a doorstop. You're not a peasant tilling muddy fields, and you're definitely not sipping mead from golden goblets in a castle. Nope. You're something in between. Tonight, you're going to live as a medieval English middle-class townsperson, a merchant's kid, born into that rare but growing group with just enough money to not starve, and just enough rules to never be comfortable. You probably won't survive this, let's be honest, but you'll have an opinion about wool prices and your own monogrammed wax seal, so, hey, small victories. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and the time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in the market town of Shrewsbury, year of our Lord 1374. The first thing you notice, after the smell, which is something between damp wood and boiled cabbage, is how loud the street is outside. Your family lives above the shop, a narrow timber frame building with uneven floors, 3 stories high, and exactly 1 chamber pot too few for your liking. The bottom floor is your father's pride and livelihood, a mercery shop selling fine fabrics and imported goods to anyone with the coin to pretend they're fancy. Upstairs it's cramped, cluttered, and always slightly smoky, even though no one remembers lighting a fire. From the moment you can walk, you're expected to help. Not in the adorable help mum bake way, but in the fetch that ledger, mind the customer, and don't knock over the spice jars because they cost more than your life way. You sweep the shop, count buttons, and eventually learn to weigh cloth on the brass scale with a seriousness that feels vaguely religious. Customers come in wearing everything from mud-stained boots to fur-lined cloaks, and you quickly learn to read their wallets by their sleeves. That's a skill they don't teach in any school, by the way. Life isn't luxurious, but it's not hand-to-mouth either. You've got food, clothing, and enough wool blankets to sleep warm most nights. There's a servant girl who helps with laundry, though she's technically an apprentice domestic, which is a fancy way of saying unpaid and very tired. Your family eats better than most, meat a few times a week, bread that's not rock hard, and even the occasional orange if a caravan makes it through without being robbed or diverted to London. You grow up with a full belly, a sceptical view of travelling monks, and a surprisingly sharp eye for counterfeit coins. Socially, your family sits in a weird little niche, not nobility but far from poor. Other townsfolk call your father Master Thomas, with a slight nod, and when the mayor visits, your mother knows exactly which goblets to bring out, the pewter ones, not the wood. Your parents talk often about honour and reputation, 2 things that seem invisible but incredibly expensive. You're constantly warned not to associate with the wrong sort, which seems to include half the town, especially that one boy who makes fart noises during Sunday Mass. Now, about that Mass. You're there every week, every holy day, and sometimes twice on feast days. The parish church is big and echoey, with draughty corners and stained glass windows that look beautiful, but do a terrible job keeping the cold out. You don't understand half the Latin, but you know when to kneel, when to mumble, and when to sneak a look at Marjorie, the baker's daughter. The priest smells like incense and dried thyme, and you once saw him fall asleep mid-sermon. He denies this, of course. At age 7, you're considered old enough to start learning the trade. Your father puts you behind the counter for short stints, mostly to learn how to handle customers without accidentally giving away half the shop's stock. He says, watch their eyes, not their words, a lesson you remember the day a noblewoman tries to flirt her way into a free bolt of Flemish velvet. You hold firm. She does not like that. Being born into this merchant class means your future isn't totally locked in, which is rare and kind of terrifying. If you mess up, you could drop down into the working poor, 1 step away from selling eels on a street corner. But if you're clever and lucky, you might end up on the town council someday, rubbing elbows with men who can afford real glass windows. It's all very exciting, in a stress-inducing ulcers by 30 kind of way. You also grow up surrounded by guild talk. Your father's part of the Mercers Guild, and it's not just a trade association. It's more like a very old, very petty fraternity with candles. They regulate who can sell, what, where, and for how much. There are secret hand signals, which may or may not be made up, strict rules about apprenticeships, and a yearly feast where everyone drinks too much ale and sings songs about import taxes. You once saw 2 grown men argue for half an hour about thread counts. Thrilling stuff. And while your life is mostly spent inside the town walls, you do get glimpses of the outside world. Traders come from the continent, speaking rapid French and strange-sounding Dutch. They bring stories of plague in Italy, new kings in far-off lands, and spices that smell like something between cinnamon and regret. You learn that the world is wider than you imagined, and also more expensive. Historically, this period marks a turning point. The Black Death has already swept through a few decades earlier, killing off a massive portion of the population. As horrible as that was, and it really, really was, it left behind gaps in the workforce and shook up the old social order. Suddenly, towns like yours are thriving, with merchants and tradesmen climbing up the ladder, while some minor nobles quietly slide down it. You don't fully understand this as a kid, but you do notice your father keeps grinning whenever someone mentions land prices. A quirky detail? The town crier is paid partially in beer, not just once but regularly. You see him every morning clanking his bell and shouting town updates, usually with the enthusiastic slur of someone who's been drinking since dawn. No one minds, that's just Roger. But even in this relatively cosy world of wool and ledgers, debate lingers. Are you really middle class, or just rich peasants with better shoes? Scholars argue over how to define your group, since middle class as a term doesn't quite exist yet. Some call you the middling sort, others lump you in with petty bourgeoisie. All you know is you're not mucking out pigs, and you're not invited to the Baron's feast, so somewhere in the middle. Your home smells like a merchant's ambition, and a little bit of onion. It's not fancy, no tapestries with heroic battles or gilded candle sconces, but it's solid, timbered, and strategically located just off the main square where foot traffic is thick and gossip even thicker. You live above the shop, of course, because that's what proper middle-class families do. Not that anyone's calling it middle class just yet. More like respectable, or the sort who owns a goose and doesn't eat it all at once. But you know what you are, even if the words haven't caught up yet. The front room downstairs is the shop, and it's your family's pride. Glass windows are too expensive, so you make do with oiled cloth that lets in a vague kind of daylight and smells like fish on warm days. Wooden shutters keep the place secure at night, and by secure we mean probably still easy to break into if you're motivated and small. Inside, shelves are stacked with bolts of cloth, jars of imported spices, wax tablets, and a few mysterious objects no one can identify but your father insists are useful trade curiosities. You live in the rooms above and behind this space, and calling it a house is generous. It's more of a vertical maze of creaky floors, low beams and drafty corners that seem to collect socks and secrets in equal measure. Your chamber is up a ladder-like staircase and shares a wall with the storage loft, so you fall asleep to the comforting scent of lavender sachets and occasionally dried fish, depending on the season. Your bed is a straw-stuffed mattress wrapped in linen, laid out on a wooden frame that creaks every time you roll over. There's a woolen blanket that's slightly itchy and perpetually damp on the edges, because medieval insulation is more of a theory than a science. You share the upstairs with your siblings, and privacy is an abstract concept. Curtains offer a weak illusion of solitude, but nothing muffles the sound of snoring, the scratching of quills, or whispered arguments over who gets the heel of the bread in the morning. At night you hear the town outside. Cartwheels bouncing over cobbles, someone drunkenly singing about St. Cuthbert, and dogs barking at shadows that might be thieves, or just rats with ambition. The kitchen is a corner of the back room with a hearth, a cauldron, and a shelf of pewter dishes that are definitely dented but lovingly polished. Most meals are cooked in one pot, soups, stews, pottages, and you eat with wooden spoons from a shared bowl. When meat's on the table, it's usually salted or smoked and never wasted. There's always bread, and it's dark, coarse, and capable of breaking a lesser man's tooth. You pretend to enjoy it. Butter is a luxury, milk is for cooking, and eggs come from the grumpy hen in the backyard who hates everyone equally. Water is fetched from the public well, which means every day starts with hauling buckets and ends with arguments about who spilled it on the stairs. Waste goes in the chamber pot, and the chamber pot gets emptied out the window at specific hours, unless someone forgets. Then you get a shout from below and possibly a fine from the town bailiff. Still, this domestic chaos is a symbol of success. You're not toiling in the fields, praying for rain or famine to hold off another week. Your roof leaks occasionally, but it's your roof. Your shop sells luxury goods, not essentials, and that means you're dealing with people who have money to spend on wants, not just needs. That's status. And you've got a few status markers too. There's the oak chest with iron hinges where your mother keeps her best linens, inherited from her aunt who swore she once served wine to a bishop. There's the carved stool your father made with his own hands before the shop made enough to buy furniture. And there's the single, real glass window, a tiny round porthole in the back wall, more decorative than functional, but enough to make the neighbours jealous. Quirky fact, you own a pet. It's a cat. Not because you love animals, but because mice love flour, and the cat is a functional member of the household workforce. Still, you've named it Matilda, and your younger sibling insists she understands Latin, which is both charming and deeply untrue. Your daily routine is built around the rhythms of town life. The bell in the church tower rings out the hours, more or less, and each sound means something. Time to open shop, time to eat, time to pretend you're working while eavesdropping on your neighbour's marital dispute. The streets below are a constant swirl of noise, smells and movement. Hawkers shout their wares, beggars rattle their bowls, horses clop, and the occasional minstrel tries to charm coins out of passers-by with a song that rhymes fleece with geese. Home is not just where you sleep. It's your social billboard. Everything about your house tells a story. The quality of your door latch, the cleanliness of your windowsill, even how often your chimney smokes. A well-swept threshold means you have pride. A front step with herbs growing in pots. That's middle-class Martha Stewart vibes. But let the woodwork rot or the shutters go missing, and suddenly people whisper that your business is failing. Reputation, as you're painfully aware, is a form of currency. Scholars debate whether this domestic space, the merchant home above the shop, truly marks a middle class, or is just a variation on tradesman life. Some argue it's not the income that matters, but the ownership. If you own your tools, your space, and your time, you're something new. Others say these homes are still deeply tied to the feudal order, with taxes, obligations, and guild oversight, keeping you closer to peasantry than to freedom. But you don't have time for that. You've got inventory to count. At the centre of your home is the family table, long and narrow, with benches on either side and a permanent lean to the left. This is where deals are whispered, blessings are said, and your uncle always manages to spill something fermented. It's also where you first see your father do the books, his ink-stained fingers scratching away on parchment, eyes squinting in candlelight, occasionally muttering curses at the French exchange rates. Watching him, you understand. This house isn't just where you live. It's where your life is negotiated, calculated, and, if you're lucky, made better for the next generation. So no, you're not in a manor. You're not even in a fancy townhouse like the merchants in London brag about. But you have space. You have heat. You have locks on your door and dried rosemary hanging from the ceiling to ward off bad smells and bad luck. That's not just a home. It's a fortress, a workplace, and a living resume. And if it creaks in the night, well, that's probably just Matilda. Or maybe the roof tiles again. The Guildhall smells like beeswax and old arguments. It's where your father disappears to twice a week, dressed in his slightly too stiff wool tunic, and that hat he swears makes him look authoritative. You've only been allowed inside once, and it felt like stepping into a secret world where everyone knew your name but none of them trusted you. This is the world of the Guild, a mixture of trade regulation, networking, low-key political scheming, and the occasional roast goose dinner. From the outside, the hall is unassuming, just another timbered building among the clustered streets. Inside, though, it's a different story. Wood-panelled walls, candles burning in heavy iron sconces, and a long table that looks like it's seen more negotiations than most royal courts. You picture your father sitting there, weighing the pros and cons of wool imports versus local dye production, while trying to keep the peace between the soap makers and the chandlers, who've been feuding for months over something to do with lye recipes. You're apprenticed now, technically still a boy, but expected to act like a miniature adult in a world where even a whisper can dent a reputation. The Guild controls nearly every aspect of your future. How long you train, when you can sell on your own, even what hours you're allowed to open shop. There's a kind of comfort in that, honestly. It's a ladder, clearly marked. But the rungs are slippery, and more than one apprentice has fallen off trying to skip a step. Your daily routine is filled with the Guild's influence. Every measurement you take, every coin you count, every stitch in the hem of a tunic is done according to rules that were probably written down during a thunderstorm in 1243. Break them, and you're fined. Break them twice, and your family gets a strongly worded letter, and possibly a cask of spoiled ale delivered mysteriously to your door. Subtle revenge is an art form here. The guild isn't just rules, though. It's also relationships. Your father's got a network. Fellow mercers, wool sellers, dyers, glovers, all connected by a shared interest in not being cheated. Guild meetings are a mix of business and drama. There are the usual suspects. Master Ewan, who talks too much about his trip to Bruges. Mistress Horwis, who runs the best cloth shop in town and terrifies half the men there. And old Jasper, who once fell asleep mid-vote and accidentally approved a tariff no one understood. You hear the gossip from the sidelines. Someone's apprentice was caught selling dyed cloth without the right stamp. Another family might be importing Flemish lace under the table, which would explain the sudden explosion of fancy collars in the chapel choir. There's even talk of a new trade route through Calais, which could mean cheaper spices, but also, unfortunately, more competition. One of the more bizarre guild traditions is the craft test. When an apprentice becomes a journeyman, they have to create a masterpiece, a literal masterpiece, to prove their skill. You've seen one, a miniature embroidered tapestry that somehow includes a hunting scene, a Madonna and child, and a horse that looks suspiciously like the town mayor. It's impressive. It's also terrifying. You'll have to make one too someday, and you're already stressing about it. Fringe fact of the night. Some guilds require members to own specific ceremonial tools, not for work, but for show. One cloth guild insists on a silver shears pin, worn on feast days and rumoured to ward off moths. No one's tested this scientifically, but everyone swears by it, including your mother, who keeps hers under the pillow during winter. The guild also oversees charitable acts. Every few months there's a fundraiser for the poor, organised with just enough publicity to make sure everyone knows who donated what. Your father always makes a show of giving, though he's also been known to mutter about how that idiot bailiff spends it all on building new stocks instead of actual bread. Still, appearances matter. Give too little, and people whisper that you're greedy. Give too much and they wonder what you're hiding. There's a dark side to all this control too. The guild can exile members, cut them off from trade entirely. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's social death. One day you're a respected tradesman with a steady income and connections. The next, no one will buy from you, your suppliers won't sell to you, and your neighbours start avoiding eye contact. You'd be surprised how fast respectability evaporates when the guild slams the door. Some scholars argue that the guilds were proto-unions, early examples of workers organising to protect their interests. Others see them as tools of economic gatekeeping, designed to keep power in the hands of a select few. From where you're standing, both things feel true. The guild gives your family stability, respect and access. But it also controls your future with a velvet-gloved fist and a ledger that remembers everything. You'll never forget your first solo errand to the guild, delivering a sealed message from your father. You walk it across town, heart pounding, because he told you not to open it, and you're 80% sure he meant that. The guild scribe takes it, nods without smiling, and marks something in a book thicker than your arm. You don't ask questions, you're learning. The guild hall is also a place of ritual. Feast days are a big deal. Once a year, the whole guild gathers for a massive banquet in honour of its patron saint, usually St. John or St. Catherine, depending on the trade. There's food, wine, singing, and a speech from the guildmaster that starts dignified and usually ends with someone falling off their stool. One year, a roasted swan was brought out with feathers reattached, and people still talk about it like it was a vision of heaven. You were allowed to help serve that night, and the memory is burned into your brain forever. You sit near the wall, watching your father laugh too loud and your mother pretend not to notice. The apprentices whisper, the journeymen boast, and the masters toast to continued prosperity and properly measured bolts. It's theatrical, it's ridiculous, and it's the closest thing to belonging you've ever felt. By now you understand that being part of the guild is more than following rules. It's playing a game, one where the stakes are your livelihood and the prize is survival with dignity. You're not noble, but you're not nothing. You're something in the middle, and if that means memorising 47 different acceptable wool measurements and learning how to fake enthusiasm for an annual cheese audit, so be it. It's market day, and the town transforms. The sun hasn't even burned through the fog yet, but the square is already alive with voices, hooves, clanking iron, and the ever-present smell of wet straw and roasted onions. As someone from the merchant class, you don't get to sleep in on days like this. No, you're up before the church bell tolls, dragging crates, sweeping the front step, and muttering about people who think haggle is a polite synonym for annoy until someone cries. Your father sends you out early with a basket and strict instructions. Get 6 yards of dyed wool from Master Digby, not a foot less, and no holes, this time. 2 jars of pickled onions from Widow Elfrida, haggle gently, she's still grieving her third husband, and check on the delivery of Flemish ribbons that were supposed to arrive last week. It's a gauntlet, but you know the terrain. You hoist the basket, duck out the low doorway and are instantly swallowed by the noise and colour of market day. The stalls line every inch of the town square and spill into the side lanes, each one a makeshift fortress of goods and pride. Canvas awnings flap in the breeze, merchants shout over each other in competing sales pitches, and already someone is trying to sell you a knife shaped like a fish. You pause, tempted, but remember the list. Business first, fish knife later. Every vendor has their own strategy. The fishmonger yells like he's calling troops to war. The baker offers free crusts to children as bait. The cloth seller next to you is using his youngest daughter, a small and unusually persuasive child, to hand out samples of dyed thread like it's royal treasure. There's a juggler trying to drum up attention near the ale booth, and someone in a too shiny robe is claiming to sell relics of St Albans toenail. You give that one a wide berth. You elbow your way to Master Digby's cloth stall. He's a round man with fingers stained from dye, and a permanent squint that somehow makes every price he quotes feel like a trick. You've done this dance before. He greets you like a nephew and then immediately tries to sell you 12 yards instead of 6. You counter, remind him of the standing agreement with your father, and after 5 minutes of performative sighing, he cuts the wool with a flourish and a wink. Transaction complete. On the way to Widow Elfrida's stall, you pass a puppet show. A small crowd's gathered, laughing as a tiny wooden knight defeats a devil with a fish. It's ridiculous, but you grin. These are your people, half ridiculous, half brilliant, and entirely unpredictable. Market day isn't just about buying and selling. It's theatre, it's rumour-mongering, it's where alliances are made and rivalries sharpened. You overhear one stallholder warn another that his ale tastes like yesterday's bathwater. The insult is taken personally. A brief shouting match ensues, broken up by the town constable, who looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. At Elfrida's you tread carefully. She's old, sharp-tongued, and rich enough to not need your business, but proud enough to want it. You praise her jars, admire her apron, and avoid mentioning the slightly pickled look of her dog. The onions are perfect, the price high, and you don't mind. You leave with the basket heavier and your dignity intact. By late morning, the market is a living beast. Louder, smellier, and significantly more chaotic. Children run between stalls with sticky fingers and no supervision. A troubadour plays the same 3 notes on a lute that hasn't been tuned since the last coronation. A pig escapes from a pen and sprints through the crowd like it owes someone money. The crowd laughs, chases, and ultimately lets it go. Some stories don't need an ending. Lunch is eaten on your feet, a warm meat pie, scalding and probably 60% questionable filler, but delicious. You eat quickly, scanning the crowd for rivals. Across the square, you spot the smug face of Edwin, the son of your father's most annoying competitor. He's selling inferior buttons at suspiciously low prices, and you make a mental note to report it at the next guild meeting. Competition is healthy. Cheating is not. Besides, his buttons tarnish in the rain and everyone knows it. Your last stop is the docks just outside the gate, where traders from the continent sometimes arrive with exotic wares. You find a tired-looking man unloading crates labelled in bad Latin and worse French. The ribbons are there, bright, delicate, and expensive. You confirm the seal, note the arrival date, and arrange for delivery. As you leave, the man offers you a strange little candy made with something he calls sugar. You try it. It's bizarre. Sweet and oddly addictive. You don't trust it. You want more. Back in the square, the afternoon winds down. The crowd thins slightly as the wealthier townsfolk retreat to their homes, arms full of sausages and new shoes. But for the rest of the merchants, it's time to make the last push. Prices drop slightly, voices get hoarse, and tensions rise. A cart breaks a wheel, a barrel of fish tips over. A priest scolds a group of girls for dancing near the ale tent. It's perfect chaos. As part of the merchant class, your family's stall stays dignified. You don't shout, you don't dance. But you do make sure the wool is folded just so, the candles are evenly spaced, and the prices are printed neatly on little slips of parchment. It's about perception. Your father always says, if we look respectable, we are. You're not entirely sure that's true, but you nod along anyway. Quirky fact. One town over, a butcher has trained his dog to guard the meat stall. It growls at anyone who lingers too long, but wags its tail if you speak Latin. No one knows why. Scholars still argue about the origins of that particular dog, and whether it might be a reincarnated monk. Someone started a ballad about it. You hope it catches on. Market day isn't just a shopping experience. It's the lifeblood of the town. It's where people connect, rumours spread, deals are struck, and alliances hinted at. You'll overhear a miller asking for a dowry arrangement, a night steward whispering about grain shortages, and two nuns suspiciously interested in beeswax prices. Every sentence means something. Every nod could change a future. Scholars still debate the actual role of market days in shaping the merchant class. Were these days opportunities for upward mobility, or just a reset button for townsfolk to circulate wealth among themselves without ever truly climbing the ladder? You don't know. You just know that by sunset your feet hurt, your basket's empty, and your head is spinning with numbers, smells, and more than one suspiciously flirtatious glance from someone near the ale cart. As the market winds down, the last deals are struck, carts roll away, and the square returns to a state of soggy, trampled stillness. You help your father pack up, count the coin, and debate whether next week's spices will arrive on time. You're tired, but proud. You navigated the chaos, survived the crowd, and didn't fall for any relic scams. That, in this world, is a win. You wake up scratching your neck because your collar is trying to strangle you again. Getting dressed as a respectable member of the merchant class in medieval England isn't just about not freezing to death, it's about sending messages. This morning you're wearing your town outfit, a tidy, well-brushed tunic dyed a modest blue-grey, cinched with a leather belt, and paired with hose that are just uncomfortable enough to remind you you're not a knight. Clothes in your world are status, armour, and sometimes punishment, all sewn together with coarse thread and a hint of ambition. Your wardrobe isn't vast. You've got maybe 3 full outfits, each carefully mended and washed with lye soap, so strong it could probably remove sin. There's a heavier wool surcoat for winter, a lighter linen shift for summer, and your Sunday best, which includes a cloak with a decorative clasp that once belonged to your grandfather and still smells faintly of pipe smoke. Every piece matters. Every choice is calculated. Too fine, and you risk a fine for dressing above your station. Too plain, and people assume business is bad. Today your mother is fussing with your sleeves, trying to get the folds just right. She adjusts the stitching on your shoulder, tuts at a spot you can't even see, and declares that you look respectable enough to be insulted by a noble. That's a compliment in this house. You grin, grab your cap, a soft wool roundlet with a short brim, and head downstairs. Fashion laws in England are strict, thanks to sumptuary laws designed to make sure no one forgets their place. Nobles wear fur and silks, clergy get deep colours and fine embroidery, and you, good merchant child, get to wear mid-range wool and hope your green doesn't look too royal. The laws are technically enforced by the local bailiff, but really it's the town gossips who patrol style violations. If you show up to church in a tunic too shiny, you'll be the subject of whispered sermons until Michaelmas. You pass a baker's boy on the street wearing a patched-up smock, barefoot, whistling a tune that might be filthy if you understood it. Then a minor knight rides past on horseback, his cloak trimmed in rabbit fur and his boots so polished you could see your reflection, if he let you look him in the eye. And then there's you, not too grand, not too poor, walking the fine line of I sell respectable goods and am not secretly a peasant. Inside your family's shop, your outfit is both a uniform and an advertisement. Customers judge you instantly, and your clothes speak before you do. A well-draped shoulder says you know good fabric. A clean hem says you care about detail. Wrinkled hose? That just says unmarried and poorly supervised. You tug them straight and try to look composed as your first customer of the day walks in. A woman with an eye for detail and a purse that squeaks when it opens. She fingers the cloth with care, squints at the stitching, and then compliments your tunic. It's part genuine, part test. You thank her politely, offer a matching piece, and note that her brooch is out of date by at least 3 summers. You don't say it out loud, of course, but you make a mental note. Trends matter here, and even subtle changes in fashion ripple through the merchant class like rumours through a nunnery. A quirky detail you've learned. Middle-class townsfolk like yourself are often the quiet trendsetters. Nobles copy the styles they see in big cities, but it's the merchant families who experiment with dyes, trims and accessories first, especially in London or York. In your town, a new sleeve cut or brighter dye shows up first in your shop window and then slowly creeps into the chapel pews. You once saw your mother invent a new way to pin a head covering that half the women on your street now copy. She pretends not to notice. She totally notices. One of your shop's best sellers right now is a new shade of blue made with woad, slightly less pungent than usual, thanks to a travelling dyer with a questionable accent and a revolutionary bucket. Your father was sceptical at first, but the colour sells. So you wear a little of it yourself, subtly of course, just enough to show you're current. If customers think you're behind the times, they'll take their coin elsewhere. Fashion is currency. So are shoes. Speaking of shoes, you wear soft leather turn shoes with reinforced soles and a very modest stitched pattern on the toe. Shoes are a big deal. Only the truly poor go barefoot, and only the absurdly rich wear anything with gold thread. You fall somewhere in the blessedly middle. You polish them with a wax your uncle makes from rendered fat and pine resin, which works great and smells like disappointment. Sometimes you look at your clothes and think about how much work went into them. The spinning, the weaving, the dyeing, the stitching. Even a simple tunic took weeks of labour, and it's likely your neighbours helped make parts of it without even knowing. The woman down the street might have spun the thread. The boy you traded lunch with last week might have dyed the wool. Clothes connect the town like invisible threads, and sometimes very visible gossip. But fashion also brings danger. Wear something too fine, and the local reeve might question where you got it. Or worse, accuse you of pretending to be of gentle birth. That's an actual crime, by the way. A few years ago, a merchant in Norwich got fined and publicly humiliated for wearing fur-lined cuffs during Lent. The cuffs were rabbit, still too fancy. He had to walk barefoot through the market square and donate 2 barrels of ale to the poor. The ale was warm, justice was harsh. There's also the open debate among historians about how much fashion really trickled down. Some argue that middle-class people like you were conservative dressers, mirroring older noble styles years after they faded from court. Others believe the merchant class created its own parallel trends, shaped by practicality and regional identity. One thing's for sure, you dress to be seen. Even if you're not trying to impress the nobility, you're definitely trying to outshine your neighbour's smug daughter, who insists on sewing her own collars. Badly. Back at home that evening, you hang up your tunic with care. It's aired out before bed to keep the wool from going musty and checked for any new wear. Your mother inspects it like it's her third child. If you ever have children, you suspect she'll be less concerned with their behaviour and more with how well their sleeves are pressed. As you settle into your night clothes, a simple linen shift soft with age, you realise something. Your clothing tells the story of who you are. Hard-working, respectable, ambitious enough to wear bright blue but smart enough not to add embroidery. And tomorrow, when you walk into the Guildhall or the marketplace or church, that story will walk with you, fold by fold. You know how to write your name, not just scrawl it, write it, carefully, legibly, with just enough flair to impress, but not so much that someone thinks you've been wasting time practicing instead of working. That's already more than most people around you can do. You're literate, and in 14th century England, that makes you something of a unicorn, albeit a modestly dressed middle-class unicorn, with ink-stained fingers and a healthy fear of the church scribe. It started when you were 6, maybe 7. Your father brought home a wax tablet and stylus, handed it to you with a nod, and told you that if you were going to work in the shop, you'd better know how to read numbers and write orders. At first, it was all numbers and inventory tallies. You learned to write 4 bolts of green wool before you learned to write your own name. Then came letters, first the alphabet, then actual letters sent to other merchants, written in thick ink and sealed with red wax that dripped onto your sleeve more often than not. Your father writes in a heavy formal script, the kind that makes every word feel like a contract. Your mother's handwriting is smaller, quicker, used for recipe notes and lists of things the servants forgot to do. Yours, somewhere in between, still learning, still blotchy, but good enough that the butcher down the road sometimes pays you a penny to write out his invoices, which you do with a flair he can't afford but deeply appreciates. Being literate means you get access to things others don't, like the Guild's minute books, which you're technically not supposed to read, but you definitely have, or the occasional letter from a travelling merchant cousin, full of stories about France, bad wine, and a near duel over a shipment of spoiled almonds. You've also read parts of the Bible, though mostly in Latin, which you don't entirely understand. You nod solemnly anyway, especially when the priest talks about scriptura sacra, like it's a lock only he has the key to. Spoiler. He fumbles that key more often than he'd like to admit. Your literacy gives you a subtle edge in business. You can record orders accurately, track debts, and decipher contracts that other merchants might nod along to without actually understanding. It also means you can read the little labels on imported goods, those fancy wine bottles from Gascony, with their florid French warnings about sediment and curses. Most people can't even pronounce the words. You read them and chuckle. Quirky fact of the day: some merchant families, especially in bigger cities, hire travelling scribes to write flattering letters to rivals or customers, essentially medieval PR. These scribes are part poet, part liar, and full-time drama starters. You once saw a letter praising your family's cloth as the finest weave outside of Flanders, known even in the halls of Calais, which is a wild exaggeration, but your father framed it anyway. It's hanging right above the account books. Books themselves are rare and precious. Your family owns exactly 3, a prayer book with worn pages, a copy of Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy that no one's ever finished, and a collection of trade proverbs hand-copied by your great-uncle, who insisted on spelling profit with 3 different letters every time. You've read all 3, twice. They sit on a high shelf next to a dried sprig of rosemary, and a key no one remembers the use for. You dream sometimes of going to school, not the brief training you've had at home, but real grammar school, maybe even university. But that's expensive, and you're needed here. Besides, most schools are run by the church, which means a lot of rote memorization, endless Latin drills, and strict clerics who believe joy is a sin and handwriting should hurt. Still, it's a nice thought. Studying in Oxford, reading Aristotle under a tree, maybe writing a little poetry on the side. You've written some already. Bad but heartfelt. No one's allowed to see it. Scholars today debate just how widespread literacy was among the middle class. Some argue that more merchants than expected could read and write, especially in towns with strong guild networks. Others think it was limited to the upper crust, those with extra coin to spare and no urgent need to pluck chickens or scrub floors. From where you're sitting, it feels like a rare skill, but a growing one. You know at least 4 other apprentices who can sign their names, and one girl who secretly reads romance tales behind her father's shop. She's currently your favourite person in town. Writing, though, is more than just words. It's control. Your family's ledger is sacred, kept under lock and key, updated daily, and only touched by those who know the system. Every sale, every debt, every promise of payment by Michaelmas is written down with cold precision. Your mother handles the numbers with terrifying accuracy, and God help the customer who tries to argue a missed payment. The ledger doesn't lie. It just ruins. Sometimes you get to write the weekly inventory reports for your father. You sharpen the quill, dip it in ink made from oak galls and vinegar, and slowly list the items. 3 bolts of crimson wool, 2 crates of French soap, 1 missing cask of fish oil. Possibly stolen, possibly evaporated, either way suspicious. You write with care, forming each letter as if it matters. Because it does. 1 bad 5 and someone's getting shorted on linen. Your handwriting is slowly improving. You've started experimenting with flourishes, just little ones, on capital letters, or the tails of G and Y. Nothing too ostentatious. The guild frowns on fancy for its own sake. But still, a little personality never hurt. You're also practicing sealing wax, dripping, stamping, not burning yourself. Mixed success. Your first try looked like someone sneezed on the parchment and sealed it with a boot heel. But progress is progress. The town scribe, Master Hal, occasionally lets you watch him work. He's old, mostly deaf, and possibly made of parchment himself. His fingers are stained dark with ink, and his script is flawless. He once told you he learned to write by copying out the same sentence 400 times. Silence pleases God more than foolish speech. Ironically, he talks constantly, but you let that slide. His penmanship is divine. And while writing and literacy feel like power, they're not always safety. You once saw a poor tanner get dragged into court because he couldn't read the contract he signed. Lost everything. Couldn't argue, couldn't plead. Just stood there blinking while a clerk read the words that condemned him. That stuck with you. Literacy isn't just knowledge, it's a shield. By night you practice letters by candlelight. You write names, prices, phrases you hear in the street. Sometimes you copy from the prayer book, just to see if you can match the style. Other times, You invent new names for the customers you dislike. Creative, unflattering, always in Latin. It's therapeutic. You never show them to anyone, except Matilda the cat. She's your silent co-conspirator in everything. You fall asleep with ink on your fingertips, dreams full of parchment, and a vague hope that tomorrow someone will ask you to write something more exciting than 3 jars pickled eels moderately fresh. But until then, you'll keep the inkpot full, the quill trimmed, and the wax seals ready. Because words in your world are as good as gold and far more dangerous. Dinner's almost ready, and the kitchen smells incredible, like roasted onion, sage, and the faintly sour tang of cider that's been stewing in a clay jug since last summer. You step in through the back door, stomping the mud off your boots, and the kitchen boy, young Ned, perpetually soot-stained and humming some tune about a goat, flashes you a grin while fanning the fire with a pair of bellows that wheeze like a dying sheep. It's warm in here, noisy, cluttered, and glorious. This is the belly of your household, and tonight it's doing something rare. It smells like meat. Food in your house is a careful thing, balanced between cost, class, and the calendar of saints. You're not rich enough to eat like a baron, but you're not poor enough to survive on broth and barley. Most days, meals are simple: vegetable pottage, cheese if it's not spoiled, bread that's dense enough to injure someone if thrown at speed, and maybe a bit of dried fish or bacon. But tonight, it's a feast, at least by your standards. A plump chicken stuffed with herbs and onions is turning on the spit, dripping fat into the fire with a satisfying hiss. There's bread, fresh, blessedly soft, and a dish of mashed parsnips that look almost fancy if you squint. Your mother's at the table carving dried apples for a tart. She's humming too, which means the shop did well today. She only hums when she's sold at least 2 bolts of velvet or outwitted Mistress Huis, her arch-rival and the only woman in town with more lace. You offer to help and she waves you off. You'll just eat the filling, she says, and she's right. You snack on a bit of crust instead. Food isn't just sustenance, it's status. The kinds of ingredients in your kitchen say a lot about your family's place in the town. Spices, pepper, cloves, cinnamon, are precious. Your father keeps them in a locked box like treasure, doled out carefully for stews and special guests. You once saw him count out peppercorns like they were coins. Salt is a bit more common, but still not cheap. The salt jar has a lid with a carved lion on top, ridiculous but very intentional. It tells visitors, "We are not peasants, thank you very much." Dinner's served with ceremony, even if it's just your family. The table is scrubbed clean, plates set out, wooden for every day, pewter if guests arrive, and the good knives are brought out from the storage chest. You each have your own spoon, which is a mark of respectability, and no one dares touch yours. Forks, hilariously rare. You've seen one, once, in the mayor's house. It looked like something used to torture frogs. Ned brings out the chicken with great flair, placing it on the board like he's delivering a sacred object. Your father carves while reciting a bit of scripture, always Matthew, always louder than necessary, and portions are handed out with casual authority. Everyone gets a bit of meat, a ladle of the parsnips and a hunk of bread. There's cider too, poured from a heavy jug into earthenware cups. You sip carefully. It's strong, sour, and just sweet enough to make you forget that it might contain a few stray wood chips. Tonight your family talks business, a possible shipment of wax from Lincoln, a dispute with a hatmaker who accused your father of price fixing, and the ongoing mystery of who keeps leaving eggs on the shop step with no note. Your mother thinks it's a gift. Your father suspects sabotage. You think it's just someone with too many chickens and a sense of humour. Food isn't the same every season. In winter it's all pickled, dried, salted, root vegetables, old cheese and meat that's been smoked into jerky. Summer brings more variety. Fresh greens, early berries, milk that hasn't yet gone off. Autumn, though, that's the golden time. Harvest, full cellars, dried apples, and enough bread to eat until you hate the sight of crust. Your mother keeps a calendar of saints' days and feasts, and meals often hinge on what's allowed. During Lent, no meat. Advent, fish. Fasting days pepper the calendar like landmines, and your stomach learns the rhythms of the church better than your ears do. One of the strangest things about food in your world is how much bread says about class. There's white bread, fine, sifted flour, soft and light, usually reserved for the gentry. Your family eats ravel bread, coarser but still respectable. The poor eat rye or barley bread, dark and dense, often mixed with whatever filler can stretch it. Peas, beans, ground up acorns if times are hard. Your family buys from a baker who knows you expect a certain quality. If the loaf's too flat or too sour, your mother will complain loudly, and the baker will apologise with a discount and a nervous laugh. Fringe fact, some people believe that food rots faster if it's been cursed. You're not sure if this is true, but one time Ned found a pie with a dead mouse baked into it and declared the whole pantry spirit-haunted. Your mother smacked him with a wooden spoon and threw the pie into the fire, which seemed like a reasonable response either way. Dinner ends with the apple tart steaming and sweet, topped with a little bit of honey. Expensive, but not ruinous. You savour it slowly, letting the sweetness settle on your tongue like a reward for surviving the day. The candlelight flickers, the fire dies down, and for a few quiet moments, the kitchen feels like the centre of the world. Then, of course, reality returns. Ned knocks over the cider jug. Your sister complains that her portion was smaller than yours. Your father starts muttering about tax collectors again. But still, you're fed, warm, and surrounded by people who argue over bread crusts and chicken bones because they care. That's a kind of wealth no coin can buy. Scholars debate how varied a medieval diet really was, especially for the merchant class. Some say it was shockingly repetitive. Stew, bread, ale, repeat. Others argue that people like your family had access to more than we assume. Trade goods, garden herbs, even dried fruit in winter. What's clear is that food was never just about filling your belly. It was a performance, a symbol, a source of pride, competition, and occasional gout. Later, as you help clear the table, you steal one more bite of tart and whisper a thank you to whoever left the eggs. May their hens be fertile and their pies mouse-free. Tomorrow it's back to hard bread and onion broth, but tonight your belly is full and your fingers sticky with honey. That's the kind of comfort you tuck into your soul and save for the lean days. You don't own much, but the king still wants his share. So does the church, and the town council, and the guild, and the baker's wife somehow, though that one's mostly in the form of moral judgment and aggressive hints about charity baskets. Being a middle-class merchant in medieval England means you're caught in a beautiful little trap. Successful enough to be noticed, but not important enough to be spared. It's like standing on a ladder with one foot on the rung and the other hovering over a tax collector's open ledger. This morning starts with a visit from the Reeve, a man whose job seems to be equal parts counting, squinting suspiciously, and sweating into a very official-looking cloak. He's here to collect the hearth tax, one of many creative ways the Crown finds to remind you that your fireplace, like everything else you touch, belongs to someone higher up the chain. One hearth, 1 penny, he announces, though your father makes a performance of arguing that the upstairs chimney doesn't count because no one lights it except when the cat gets too cold. The Reeve doesn't laugh. He writes something in his book and moves on, muttering. You've heard about worse taxes, of course. The poll tax, for instance. That's the one everyone still talks about in hushed tones. A flat fee, same for rich or poor, man or woman. In theory, fair. In practice, an absolute disaster. It was one of the sparks that lit the peasants' revolt, which, depending on who's telling the story, was either a righteous uprising or a mob of pitchfork-waving lunatics who got lost halfway to Canterbury. Either way, it ended badly for the rebels, and for a few unlucky tax collectors who found themselves minus a head or two. Back in your world, the taxes are smaller but constant. There's the market toll, collected whenever you bring goods to sell in the town square. A few pennies for a stall, a few more for storage privileges, even though that just means you're allowed to stack your crates on the mud like everyone else. Then there's the bridge toll, the road maintenance fee, the shipping levy, and the annual feast contribution, which sounds festive but is really just a polite demand to fund the mayor's dinner party. And don't forget the guild dues. The Mercers Guild collects its fees like a jealous landlord, regularly, firmly, and with great ceremony. You're told the money goes toward guild maintenance, charitable donations, apprentice training, and the occasional feast with undercooked goose. It's true, technically, but it also funds the guildmaster's 3rd pair of imported leather boots, and the chair with armrests so wide you could host a chess tournament on them. Then there's the church. Oh, the church. The tithe is the most sacred of taxes, 1/10 of your income paid faithfully to keep God's house well-roofed and the priest well-fed. It doesn't matter if your profit margins are thin, or if a storm ruined your shipment of candles. The tithe is non-negotiable. If you protest, you're not just cheap, you're heretical. And no one wants that label floating around, especially with Bishop Edmund always sniffing around for signs of unorthodox behaviour. The man once accused a cobbler of sin because his boots had mismatched laces. You don't take chances. Tithes aren't just money either. Sometimes it's goods: grain, cloth, oil, chickens. One year your family gave the church 3 baskets of wax candles and a bolt of cloth so stiff it could stand up on its own. The priest thanked you warmly, then promptly used the cloth as a table runner at the midsummer feast. Your mother never quite got over it. Now, some middle-class folks get clever. They fudge the numbers, underreport earnings, stash a few coins in the flour barrel. Your father doesn't. He says it's too risky. Besides, your family's reputation is worth more than a few hidden pennies. He'd rather grumble loudly and pay honestly than sneak around and risk losing his standing, or worse, having to confess it to the priest with his judgmental eyebrows and suspiciously large wine cup. What really grates is that the nobles don't pay nearly as much. Not in proportion anyway. They have land, titles, income from peasants, and often special exemptions carved out through old family arrangements. You, on the other hand, have exactly 1 backyard chicken and a shop that sells buttons and bolts of cloth. Yet somehow, your tax burden feels heavier than a knight in full armour sitting on your shoulders. A fringe bit of trivia: there was once a tax on beards. Not here, thankfully, but somewhere in the Holy Roman Empire. Allegedly it was meant to discourage vanity. The irony being that most men just paid the fee and grew even more elaborate facial hair out of spite. You bring this up at dinner once. Your father doesn't laugh. He strokes his moustache and mutters, "They'd have to pry it from my cold, whiskered face." Some townspeople have started gathering for informal complaint circles, usually at the alehouse, with much ale and little actual resolution. It's where theories fly. The baker thinks the miller is skimming flour. The candlemaker claims the tithe collector weighs his coins on a crooked scale. The brewer, always the loudest, has a theory that the taxes are all a front to fund a secret wine cellar beneath the abbey. You suspect he's more right than he knows. Scholars still debate the impact of medieval taxation on the emerging merchant class. Was it a stifling burden that held back growth, or a necessary evil that kept towns functioning and roads walkable? The answer, like most things, is yes. Taxes were painful, annoying, sometimes wildly unfair, but they also funded bridges, kept guards paid, and let the town light torches at night so you didn't trip over a sleeping goat. You resent them. You also rely on them. It's a complicated relationship. Today you sit down with the household ledger and help tally the latest tax demands. It's a grim ritual. Your mother calls it feeding the ghost, as if the taxman were some kind of spectral figure that haunts respectable homes demanding coin and compliance. You light a candle, open the book, and begin to calculate. Market toll, tithe, guild dues, repair fund, winter levy. The numbers blur together, and your stomach twists as the pile of obligations grows taller than your profits. But you do it. You pay it. You curse under your breath, make a note to avoid the reeve next time he passes, and scrape together the coin from the strongbox in the pantry. It's not glamorous. It's not fair, but it's what's required. You tuck the ledger away, blow out the candle, and sigh. Then you remember that tomorrow is the feast of St. Crispin, which means church services, no market, and a bonus donation to the parish. You let out groans so loud even the chicken flinches. Life in the medieval middle class isn't just about making money. It's about watching it vanish into other people's pockets, often with a smile and a blessing. The bells ring before sunrise. Again. It's not even a holy day, just a Tuesday, but someone has died or confessed or given birth, or possibly all 3, and the priest wants the entire town to know about it. You roll over beneath your blanket, sighing into the wool, and listen as the peals echo through the narrow streets like some divine alarm clock. You've got half a mind to curse the bell ringer, but you're not keen on waking up with boils, so you settle for muttering something vaguely annoyed and very unbiblical. In your world, religion is not a weekend hobby. It's baked into every single day, from dawn prayers to candlelit vespers, and skipping any part of that rhythm is equal parts social scandal and spiritual suicide. You're not just expected to believe, you're expected to attend, observe, donate, and occasionally carry a candle taller than your youngest sibling. And heaven help you if you fall asleep during Mass. It's been done. There were consequences. One boy was hit with a hymnal and had a permanent dent in his pride. The parish church is a central part of your life. Literally. It's smack in the middle of town, a stone and mortar declaration that whatever you think you're doing with your day, God probably has other plans. The building looms over the market square, its tower always pointing accusingly at the sky like it's tattling on everyone. Inside, it's dim, echoing, and smells like incense, candle wax, and occasionally wet dog if it's raining and someone forgets to keep the door closed. You attend Mass every Sunday, and also on feast days, saints' days, holy days, and sometimes on random Thursdays when the priest says he felt moved by the Spirit, which you've started translating as woke up early and wanted to talk. The service is in Latin, of course, which means you don't understand most of it, but that's not the point. You're there to be seen, to participate, to show that you're a good, God-fearing citizen who definitely doesn't skip confession, and certainly never hides peppercorns in the flour barrel to avoid the tithe. You know the order of service by heart. You can hum the hymns, kneel with practiced grace, and even fake your way through a chant or two. When the priest lifts the host, you bow your head respectfully. When he swings the censer, you inhale like it's holy therapy. And when he gives the sermon, usually a dramatic warning about lust, laziness, or the devil's fondness for card games, you nod solemnly, even if you're secretly counting the rafters or wondering what's for lunch. The church isn't just a place of worship, it's a social hub, a moral compass, and a community theatre all rolled into one. It's where marriages are arranged, grievances aired, scandals whispered, and reputations managed. The pew you sit in says a lot. So does how much you donate, how often your candle burns during Vespers, and how piously you bow during the procession. Even the churchyard is part of the social ladder. Being buried closer to the altar is a sign of both spiritual devotion and financial success. Your grandfather's grave is 3 rows back, near the crabapple tree. Not bad. There are over 40 holy days each year, each one requiring attendance, ritual, and usually the disruption of business as usual. Some are joyful, feasts, music, church plays featuring devils with squeaky pitchforks and angels who look suspiciously like the local butcher's daughter. Others are solemn, with processions, fasting, and hours of kneeling that leave your knees numb and your mind drifting to whether you remembered to bolt the shop door. One of your favourites is Candlemas. It's got everything: flame, music, and a blessed candle you get to take home and put in the window to keep away storms. You still have last year's stub, half burned and slightly chewed by the cat. On the other end of the spectrum is Rogation Day, which involves walking around the town's borders, singing prayers for good harvests while getting rained on and bitten by flies. Character building, they say. And then there's confession. Once a week you file into the chapel, kneel at the screen, and tell the priest everything you've done wrong, or at least everything you're willing to admit. He sighs, nods, assigns penance, usually prayers, sometimes charitable acts, once 3 days of bread and water because you said something unkind about your neighbour's pig, and sends you off absolved. Whether you feel forgiven is another matter. Quirky fact: some towns host church-sponsored miracle plays with scripts that mix actual scripture with enthusiastic improvisation. One year, your cousin played the Archangel Michael and accidentally set part of his robe on fire while smiting a demon. The audience thought it was divine special effects. He hasn't stopped talking about it since. Your family contributes to the church, of course. Donations, candles, linens for the altar, even a small stained glass window installed last year, depicting St. Lawrence holding a grill, which no one likes to explain to the children. Your mother leads a guild of women who sew vestments and manage the feast day decorations. Your father pretends not to care but checks the accounts every time the priest makes a new improvement to the building. The lines between religion and everyday life blur constantly. You say grace before meals, invoke saints when you sneeze, and keep a painted icon of the Virgin Mary in the hallway for protection and general peacekeeping. You also have a few charms tucked away. Technically frowned upon, but everyone has them. A dried rose from a pilgrimage, a bone fragment allegedly from St. Cuthbert, probably a chicken, and a ribbon blessed by a travelling monk who claimed he once saw a vision of Christ in a mud puddle. Scholars debate how deep the faith of the medieval middle class truly was. Were they pious or just afraid of hell? Did they go to mass out of belief or social pressure? The answer is both. You believe or try to. You pray or try to. And you definitely try not to think about how much of your coin ends up in the church's lockbox. Religion is comfort, it's community, it's control, and it's inescapable. Tonight, as the bells toll again for evening prayer, you light the candle in the hallway and whisper a short blessing, just in case. The town feels quieter after dark, like even the cobblestones are listening. You wonder if saints watch through windows, or if they too are weary of sermons that go too long. You blow out the candle, tuck the stub safely beside its twin, and crawl into bed. Tomorrow's another day of work, worship, and trying not to offend any angels by accident. But for now, you let the silence settle, close your eyes, and hope that if the divine is watching, it's in a good mood. You're 17 and about to marry someone you've known for approximately 3 conversations and a handful of strategic glances across the churchyard. Welcome to medieval romance. Part negotiation, part family planning, part guessing game about how well someone smells under pressure. Love might find a way, eventually, but first, there's the small matter of dowries, social standing, fertility forecasts, and whether your intended's father has been caught shortchanging the spice merchants. Again, marriage in your world isn't really about love. It's about property, position, and future apprentices. You're not noble, so you're not marrying to unite great houses or secure titles. But you're middle class, so your marriage still has stakes. Marrying too far down is risky. Your children might not get into the guild, your name might suffer, and heaven forbid your spouse doesn't know how to manage a ledger. Marrying too far up? Laughable. No knight's daughter is going to wed a merchant's son who still trips on stairs and smells faintly of sheep dye. The sweet spot. Another merchant family, ideally one with good coin, a steady hand, and minimal drama. Your parents begin scouting when you're about 15. They make casual inquiries, over dinner, during church services, while buying pickled turnips. You pretend not to notice, but you do. The local candlemaker's daughter comes up in conversation. She's sensible, educated, known for her embroidery and her ability to recite 3 psalms backward. You've spoken exactly twice, both times about the weather. She blushes easily and smells like beeswax. Honestly, it could be worse. Marriage contracts come next. There's haggling involved, not over feelings, over dowries. Your family expects some land, a chest of linens, and maybe a small cash sum. In return, you'll provide a home, respect, and ideally, children who don't ruin the family business by turning into wandering minstrels. It's a tense time. Meetings with her father stretch long into the evening, punctuated by sighs, wine, and the sound of your mother murmuring about how young people these days have no sense of duty. Eventually it's agreed. The match is made. There's a sigh of relief and a suspiciously large shipment of wine sent to your house, which your uncle drinks half of before dinner. Now comes the ceremony. Not the wedding yet, but the betrothal. It's like a pre-marriage, a binding promise sealed with a kiss on the cheek, and a handshake that probably means more to your parents than you. Then, after a few months of anxious waiting, the big day arrives. Weddings in the middle class are grand, but not noble-level grand. You can't afford golden goblets or roasted swans, but you've got bread, beer, and a chicken for every table, which feels downright decadent. The church bells ring, again, the whole town shows up because free food, and you find yourself standing in front of the altar, wearing your best tunic and trying not to sweat through it. Your bride looks composed. You look vaguely capable. The priest drones on in Latin, occasionally switching to English to remind you that this is a holy union, that it's permanent, and that God is watching closely. Rings are exchanged, vows are spoken. You kneel, rise, and are officially declared husband and wife. Cue the feast. The reception takes place in the guild hall, which has been decorated with flowers, banners, and one extremely confused goose, a gift from a cousin, who didn't read the invitation. The tables are lined with trenchers of bread, bowls of stew, roasted vegetables, and enough cider to make even the priest loosen his collar. There's music, fiddles, drums, a man playing a harp who may or may not be sober, and dancing. Lots of dancing. You do your best not to trip. You succeed, mostly. And yes, there's bedding. Or rather, the public acknowledgement of it. Your families gather, walk you both to your new shared chamber, and make a theatrical show of handing over the bed linens like it's the crown jewels. Everyone laughs, someone makes a joke about grandchildren, and then, finally, they leave. You and your new spouse stare at each other for a long moment, then you laugh, because what else is there to do? In the weeks that follow, you settle into married life like someone trying on a slightly stiff tunic. There are adjustments. She prefers to sleep near the window. You hate the draft. She folds the linens a different way. You mutter and refold them when she's not looking. She's better at math than you, and soon she's handling half the shop's accounting. Your father pretends to be scandalised. Your mother is quietly smug. Over time, a rhythm forms. You run the shop together. You share meals, gossip, duties. Sometimes you argue about prices, about when to visit her mother, about whether pepper belongs in soup, but you also laugh, you also talk. You even start to like her voice in the morning, low and scratchy, like it belongs in a song. Quirky fact: in some towns, newlywed couples are gifted a fertility loaf, a bizarrely shaped piece of bread blessed by the priest and baked by the town's oldest widow. You receive yours on the third day after the wedding. It's dry, crumbly, and deeply unsettling. You eat half anyway because your mother says it's tradition. You bury the rest behind the garden. Nothing grows there for weeks. Your marriage is, in many ways, a business merger with feelings. It's a partnership built on shared goals, mutual respect, and the hope that you'll both survive long enough to see your children take over the shop. Romantic? Not always. But meaningful? Absolutely. Especially in a world where love is a luxury and security is a prize hard won. Of course, not every match goes so smoothly. One of your friends marries a brewer's daughter who turns out to hate merchants, numbers, and the entire concept of cleanliness. Another match is broken off at the last minute when it's discovered the groom-to-be owes money to 3 different butchers. Scandal. Very juicy. The town is still talking about it. Scholars argue about the role of affection in medieval marriages. Some believe love was irrelevant, a distraction at best. Others point to letters, poems, even court records that hint at real attachment, real care. In your case, it starts as formality. But slowly, steadily, it becomes something more. On your first anniversary, your wife gives you a new ledger cover. It's simple, sturdy, embroidered with a pattern of vines and tiny birds. You thank her with a kiss on the cheek, and a pair of gloves you bought from a travelling peddler 2 months earlier and kept hidden behind the candlestock. She wears them to mass the next day, smiling just enough to make you feel like you got it right. So no, your marriage didn't begin with a declaration of love under the stars, but it's growing into something solid, something warm. And in a world filled with uncertainty, that's more valuable than any dowry. You've just stepped in a puddle, indoors, again. It's a small, cold reminder that despite your elevated status, you're still living in a world where sanitation is more theory than reality, and your home occasionally leaks from both ends. But then again, you're not the one mopping it up. That job belongs to Margaret, your household servant, who appears behind you with a bucket and a glare that could curdle cream. "I just cleaned that," she says, not even bothering to hide her disdain. You mumble an apology and retreat upstairs, respectfully, quickly. Being middle class in medieval England means you don't scrub your own floors, or empty your own chamber pot, or bake your own bread most days. You're not rich, but you're comfortable enough to have help. And with that help comes its own strange set of rules, expectations, and social gymnastics. Servants are part of your household but not part of the family, unless they are. Until they aren't. It's complicated. Margaret's been with your family for 6 years. She started young, barely 12, brought in from the countryside by an aunt who owed your father money and thought this counted as repayment. She's sharp, fast with a broom, and terrifyingly efficient at wringing secrets out of overheard whispers. If there's a scandal brewing, she knows about it before the priest. She gets paid, just enough to keep her loyal, and eats at the second table in the kitchen with the other servants, unless it's a feast day, in which case she gets an extra portion and the day off to spend at her sister's, unless it rains. Then she's expected to stay and mop again. Servants in your world are status symbols. The more you have, the higher you sit on the social ladder. 2 full-time staff, respectable. 4, impressive. Anything more and you're basically royalty. Though possibly also broke because servants eat, wear shoes, and occasionally develop expensive opinions. Your family has 3, Margaret, Ned the kitchen boy, still alive, still sticky, and Tom, an apprentice-turned-messenger whose main skill appears to be looking busy while avoiding actual work. Your father insists Tom is promising. Your mother calls him decorative. You don't treat your servants cruelly. You're not a noble, after all, and besides, if you're too harsh, they'll leave, and finding new help is a nightmare. But the divide is clear. They sleep in the attic, share blankets, and eat stew that's more water than meat. They call you master or mistress, not by your first name, and if they ever overstep, well, your father keeps a birch rod behind the door, mostly for show. Mostly. Still, Margaret's practically family. She's helped nurse 2 of your siblings through winter fevers, knows how your mother takes her tea, and once stood up to a visiting alderman who got a little too familiar after a few mugs of cider. She didn't flinch. You still admire her for that. Status games don't stop at home. In town, everything is measured. what you wear, how clean your doorstep is, how many servants accompany you to market. Some families hire extra help during holy days just to look more important. Temporary staff with matching aprons and blank expressions, paraded around like livestock in a morality play. It's all absurd, but it works. People notice. Then there's the matter of how you treat them. If you're too kind, you're seen as soft, too strict, and you're labelled cruel. Your parents walk that line with practised ease. Your mother gives Margaret old dresses and lectures. Your father pays Ned in coin and sarcasm. Balance. You remember one winter when Ned nearly froze walking back from the bakery. Your mother knit him mittens. He cried, quietly, into the stew, and no one mentioned it again. Quirky fact. There's a superstition in your town that says if a servant dreams of rats 3 nights in a row, their master is cursed with bad fortune. Margaret once faked 3 consecutive rat dreams to get your father to cancel a risky wool shipment. The ship ended up capsized in the channel. She hasn't let him forget it. The lines between master and servant sometimes blur, especially in small homes. You hear their stories, catch them laughing in the kitchen, even share jokes. But there's always a wall, a social curtain no one talks about but everyone knows is there. They can be close, but not too close. They can care, but not too loudly. It's a delicate dance, and you're always a step behind. Some scholars argue that the servant system in medieval towns was more humane than in noble estates. After all, many servants came from nearby villages, stayed with families for years, and sometimes even received inheritances. Others say it was just a softer form of exploitation, with long hours, low pay, and no real escape. Again, both are probably true. Margaret will likely never own property, but she'll always have a place to sleep and stew to eat. It's something. Whether it's enough is another matter. One of your wealthier neighbours has 5 servants. One of them is a musician, not a bard, an actual in-house musician who plays the lute during dinner and sighs dramatically whenever someone drops a spoon. Your family tried that once. It lasted 2 days. Margaret threatened to throw him out a window. He left before breakfast. Tonight you sit by the fire and watch as Margaret finishes folding the linens. She's humming again. Not a hymn, something older, softer, from a place she doesn't talk about much. She catches you listening, smiles faintly and goes back to work. You nod, say thank you, and she shrugs like it means nothing. But it does. Later you find Ned asleep in the pantry, curled up like a cat with a stale biscuit in his hand. You cover him with a spare blanket. He never wakes. You wonder, not for the first time, what their lives are like beyond the walls of your home. What dreams they have, what futures they hope for, and whether any of it ever really changes. Maybe one day Margaret will open her own shop. Maybe Ned will become a cook. Maybe Tom will learn to count past 20 without using his fingers. Or maybe not. Maybe they'll always be where they are, orbiting your world, holding it together with broomsticks and patience. You climb the stairs to your own bed, warm, dry, and freshly made by someone else's hands. You lie awake for a while, staring at the wooden beams, listening to the soft sounds of the house settling for the night, and you wonder, if all your servants left tomorrow, how long would it take before the place fell apart? Answer, half a day, maybe less. You're not a noble. You do not own a manor. You do not ride around on a warhorse barking orders at peasants. But don't let that fool you. You've got influence. Maybe not the sword-swinging, banner-waving, hereditary title kind, but the my opinion matters at town council meetings kind, which, in a medieval English town, might be even more powerful depending on how you use it. You're middle class, yes, but middle class with connections, and connections are currency. Tonight is the monthly council gathering, and you've been allowed to attend, not as a member, not yet, but as your father's assistant, which means you carry the ledgers, try not to yawn, and write down every single complaint about fish weights, fence lines, and unlicensed ale vendors. The meeting is held in the upper chamber of the Guildhall, a timber-beamed room with smoke-stained walls and long benches where the town's decision-makers sit like robed owls, puffed up and ready to hoot. At the head sits the mayor, a man whose robes are at least 2 seasons out of fashion, but whose voice carries like a ship's bell. Beside him, the aldermen, men like your father, tradesmen and respected merchants who've worked their way up through decades of polite arguing and strategic cheese donations. There's Master Godfrey, the glove-maker who insists on quoting scripture before every vote. Mistress Agnes, who owns half the butcher stalls and doesn't trust anyone under 40. And Walter the miller, whose understanding of civic finance is flexible at best. And then there's you, sitting at the side table with ink-stained hands and a seat that wobbles. First order of business, drainage. It always is. The south lane floods every time it rains, and the residents are furious. Again. Mistress Agnes suggests raising the road with gravel. Godfrey suggests prayer. Walter blames ducks. The mayor calls for a vote. Gravel wins. Barely. Next, the price of fish. The fishermen claim costs are rising. The fishmongers claim the fishermen are lying. One councilman brings out a dried herring as evidence. It breaks in half. No one knows what that proves. The debate ends with a compromise. Fish prices will rise, but only on Fridays. Someone tries to point out that Friday is the main fish-eating day. They are ignored. Your father speaks up about shopfront signage. Apparently the apothecary down the road hung a sign so large it blocked the sunlight from 2 homes and frightened a horse. The sign is of a unicorn for reasons unclear. The council agrees to limit shop signs to no more than 1 arm's reach from the wall, though no one can agree on whose arm should be the standard. This is civic life for the medieval merchant class. Weirdly specific, endlessly bureaucratic, and surprisingly powerful. Your father doesn't have a title, but when he raises an eyebrow at a proposal, people listen. And when he sighs and says, "This isn't Bruges, gentlemen," it ends discussion entirely. He's respected, feared, and quietly envied. And you're watching him like a hawk, trying to learn the moves. Being on the town council means more than just meetings. It means you help set market rules, mediate disputes, and occasionally get invited to dine with visiting dignitaries, assuming there's wine and not just watery ale. You get to influence tolls, approve charters, and recommend which potholes get fixed first. It's petty power, sure, but it adds up, especially when you consider the alternative, being one of the townsfolk shouting outside, hoping someone inside listens. Not everyone trusts the council, of course. Some say it's too self-serving, too cosy with the guilds, too obsessed with making rules about the curvature of sausages, an actual discussion from 2 months ago, long story. Others say it's the only thing keeping the town from collapsing into chaos and pig-related lawsuits. Again, both are probably true. Quirky fact, there's a tradition in your town that new council members must provide a barrel of ale for the entire community upon election. This tradition started as a gesture of goodwill, and has since evolved into a rowdy public feast where everyone gets very drunk and forgets who's actually on the council. Your father dreads the day he's elected mayor for this reason alone. He hates crowds, and drunks, and ale. That's not his. Tonight's meeting ends with a vote on repairing the West Gate. It's leaning again. The stonemason says it'll cost more than last year. The mayor rolls his eyes so hard you worry they'll stick that way. A compromise is reached. Reinforce it with timber, pray for mild weather, and revisit next quarter. You quietly write it down, wondering how long timber and prayer can hold back a winter storm. Probably not long. As everyone files out, you linger. You catch snippets of conversation. Rumours of a new toll proposed by the king's tax agent, a dispute over a communal oven, and something about a runaway goose causing damage to a haberdasher's stall. Civic life, in all its glory. On the walk home, your father is silent at first, then grumbles about Walter's obsession with blaming ducks for everything. You ask if you'll ever be on the council. He gives you a look and says, "You take too many notes not to be." That's probably a compliment. Some historians argue that the rise of civic councils was the beginning of a true middle class. People who weren't noble, but who wielded real, structured power. Others claim it was just another version of feudal control with guilds and councils acting as gatekeepers. You, however, suspect it's mostly a bunch of grumpy merchants arguing about sewage and trying not to offend the church. When you get home, your wife is waiting up. She asks if it was productive. You tell her about the herring. She laughs, then frowns, then reminds you that you're supposed to attend the baker's licensing appeal tomorrow. More meetings, more ink, more civic responsibility. Still, there's something satisfying about knowing your voice eventually might matter. That your suggestions might shape the street layout, or improve the market stalls, or finally, get that horrible-smelling fishmonger moved away from the candle shop. You go to bed with sore fingers and a head full of bylaws. It's not glamorous, but it's real. You're part of something. You're shaping the world, one fish debate at a time. It starts with a cough, not yours but your neighbour's. Then another, louder, ragged. You hear it through the thin walls as you open shop for the day. You ignore it at first. People cough, especially in spring when the rain never stops and the air smells like damp wool. But by the end of the week, the coughing has spread, the baker's wife hasn't opened her shutters, and the apothecary's been seen running through town with 3 different sacks of herbs and a face that says doom is trending. Then come the deaths. 1, then 4, then 12. Your mother lights a candle every morning and crosses herself until her fingers are sore. The church bell rings so often it feels like a warning more than a comfort. People whisper about it in the market, in church, behind closed shutters. The pestilence, the blackness, God's judgment. And suddenly, your tidy, wool-scented, middle-class life becomes a waiting room for death. The plague is back. The last time you were a child, barely old enough to remember much beyond the fear, the funerals and the smell of lime-washed walls. You thought that was over. A freak tragedy, like a once-in-a-century flood or a nobleman being polite. But now, it's here again. And this time, you understand. It spreads fast. Too fast. People vanish from the streets, doors are nailed shut and cartwheels creak at dawn as the dead are hauled out under cover of prayer. No one touches, no one talks, and even the town crier starts whispering. Your father insists the shop stays open. We are not beggars, he says, and we are not cursed. But he wears gloves now, and he doesn't take coins directly, makes customers drop them into a wooden bowl soaked in vinegar. Your mother won't let anyone inside without sniffing a sachet of dried lavender and sage. Your sister scrubs the doorknob every hour, muttering rhymes she learned from a healer who left town 2 days ago and hasn't been seen since. Some people flee, the rich mostly. Nobles retreat to their country estates, priests vanish on pilgrimage, and even a few merchants load up carts and disappear down the road like ghosts with pockets. Your family stays. There's nowhere else to go, and besides, you've built a life here. Brick by brick, bolt by bolt. Leaving would mean starting over, or worse, being outsiders. Every night you count symptoms like tally marks. Do you feel warm? Is that a cough or just the smoke from the hearth? You wake up sweating, dreaming of blackened fingers and swollen glands. Your wife checks your forehead. You check hers. Neither of you speaks. There's nothing to say. The town goes quiet, shops close, bells toll. The streets smell of smoke, rot, and too many herbs burning in too small spaces. People hang herbs over their doors, burn rosemary, paint crosses on their windows. One man walks through the square covered in sackcloth, wailing about divine punishment. The constable lets him. No one has the energy to stop him. You try to keep busy, writing ledgers, sorting inventory, pretending to clean. Anything to avoid the stillness, the silence, the terrifying certainty that you're not in control of anything anymore. And then Margaret, your servant, coughs. It's dry at first, then wet, then constant. You move her to a back room, away from the family, and your mother prays over her while your wife boils linens and rubs onion poultices on the walls. You leave food at the door. You hear her moan once, then nothing. She dies the next night. You bury her before dawn. No ceremony, just a prayer mumbled through tears and a hastily dug grave in the yard. Your mother weeps. Your wife stays silent. You just stare at the dirt, hands shaking, unable to feel anything except a dull, echoing numbness. Quirky fact, if you can call it that. In some places people carry pomanders, little balls filled with perfume and herbs, meant to ward off the disease. You make one with dried rose petals, cloves, and a sliver of camphor, hanging it from your belt like a talisman. You know it's useless. You wear it anyway. Then Ned starts coughing. You've known him since he was a boy, half wild and covered in jam. Now he's pale, shivering, burning with fever. You sit beside him, spooning broth into his mouth, whispering stories about saints and miracles. He dies on the 3rd day. You stop counting the dead after that. Scholars still debate what people believed caused the plague. Bad air, corrupted humours, divine punishment, even planetary alignment. The actual answer, of course, is fleas and bacteria. But you don't know that. All you know is that washing with vinegar helps a little. Incense makes it feel better, and every knock on the door could be your last. And yet, you endure. Weeks pass. The toll lessens. Fewer bells. Fewer carts. The market reopens slowly. People emerge, pale and shaken, like survivors of a war fought in silence. You help your mother scrub the walls, burn old linens, and replace everything that touched the sick. You burn Margaret's apron, Ned's cap, even the pillow he loved. Your father says nothing, just digs into the accounts and finds out which shipment survived. Eventually the plague ebbs, like a tide retreating after a storm. It doesn't vanish. It never really does. It just becomes quiet. Background. Something you don't talk about unless you have to. You stand at the edge of the marketplace one morning, eyes scanning the crowd. The candle maker is back. The miller's cart is wobbling down the road again. Someone's selling ginger cakes. It's not normal, but it's something. You've lost people. You've lost time. You've lost the comfortable illusion that your status could protect you. But you're still here, breathing, standing, selling cloth to a woman who won't meet your eyes and who disinfects the coin she gives you with a sprig of rosemary. You take it anyway. What else can you do? There's talk of rebuilding, of honouring the dead, of improving sanitation and opening a new plague house outside town. There's always talk after. Sometimes it even leads to change. Mostly it just fades. That night you light a candle for Margaret. For Ned. For everyone who vanished too quickly to be properly remembered. The flame flickers, small and unsteady, and you protect it with your hand. Tomorrow there will be more work, more customers, more life. But tonight, just for a while, you let yourself mourn. You're 14 years old and feeling very proud of yourself. That's because today, you're not sweeping the floor of your father's shop or organising buttons by size for the third time this week. Number. Today you're leaving. Not forever. Just for the next 7 years. Maybe longer. You've been officially apprenticed, signed, sealed, and handed over like a particularly undercooked loaf of bread. Welcome to your teenage purgatory. Apprenticeship is the rite of passage for most middle-class youth in your world. It's how you learn a trade, earn a reputation, and one day, if the stars align and you survive your master's temper, become a full-fledged member of your guild. It's also how families make alliances, test their children's spine, and in some cases gently get them out of the house before they start asking too many questions about the family ledger. Your father chose your master with the precision of a man selecting a battle horse. Master Edric, a mercer like your father, but older, richer, and with a moustache so long it might qualify as a trade secret. His shop is across town, larger, better situated, and definitely cleaner. He's strict, fair, and rumoured to have once chased off a thief with nothing but a candle snuffer. You're intimidated, and mildly jealous of the candle snuffer. You arrive at his home carrying your small bundle, 2 tunics, a brush, and a little wooden figure carved by your sister that you swear you didn't cry about when she handed it to you. Edric's wife greets you at the door with a look that says, "Don't break anything," and immediately sets you to work sweeping the threshold. You do, badly. She sighs. The next 7 years begin. Life as an apprentice is educational. Not in the "this is interesting" way, more in the "I'm learning how to scrub soot off a hearth without coughing up a lung" way. You rise before dawn, tend the fire, haul water, clean tools, fetch groceries, and occasionally get yelled at by the cat who clearly outranks you. You eat after everyone else, sleep in the attic, and share a bedroll with straw that has very strong opinions. But in between all the drudgery, you learn the trade, slowly, carefully, by watching Edric measure fabric, haggle with customers, and cut cloth so precisely you're convinced he's secretly a wizard. He teaches you how to spot good dye, how to fold linen without creasing it, and how to gently but firmly convince someone they absolutely do need 3 yards of French wool, even if it costs more than their horse. Apprenticeship is part work, part education, part hostage situation. You belong to your master now, legally and socially. You can't marry. You can't leave without permission. You can't even keep personal earnings unless your master says you can. In return, he feeds you, houses you, and if he's any good, teaches you how not to make a fool of yourself when the guild finally comes to test your skills. Quirky fact. In some towns, apprentices wear specific caps or ribbons to mark their status, sort of a medieval trainee badge. Your town hasn't gone that far, but you still get pointed at in the market by children who shout, "That's Edric's boy!" like you're some kind of exotic goat. You do your best to ignore them, mostly. The household you now live in is orderly, quiet, and far less chaotic than your own. Edric has no children, and his wife manages things with the efficiency of a military quartermaster. Meals are plain but steady. Rules are many. Talking back is not tolerated, but asking smart questions earns you rare, precious nods of approval. You collect those nods like coins. 1 year in, you've graduated from sweeping to helping at the counter. You watch as customers run their fingers across silks, try to haggle like dukes, and always, always claim they were quoted a lower price last week. You learn to keep your face calm, your tone even, and your fingers ready to slap the abacus. You start to understand why your father always rubbed his temples after market day. You also learn the social rules of apprentices. There's a hierarchy, unspoken but ironclad. New apprentices scrub, senior ones supervise. You're somewhere in the middle, which means you're bossed around and blamed when things go wrong. There's also rivalry, especially with the baker's apprentice who thinks he's better than you just because he smells like bread and has both eyebrows. You'll get even. Someday. Scholars debate how binding apprenticeship contracts really were. Technically, they're sacred, a promise before God and guild. But you hear stories. One boy ran off to join a travelling puppet troupe. Another eloped with the miller's daughter and vanished into the hills. A third simply disappeared after being caught misusing the shears, which you've decided not to ask about. You, however, stay. Partly out of duty, partly because you want to prove you can finish what your father started. By year 3, you're doing real work. Measuring cloth, handling deliveries, even balancing the ledger, under supervision of course. You're still not allowed to order goods or negotiate major sales, but you're trusted enough to be left alone in the shop for short bursts. It feels like power. Fragile, terrifying power. The kind that disappears if you spill ink on the last bolt of velvet. Again. One of your proudest moments comes when a customer asks you a question, not Edric, and listens to your answer. It's a small thing, but it lingers. That, and the time you caught a boy trying to nick a purse of buttons and shouted so loudly half the market turned to look. Edric gave you a nod. His wife gave you pie. That was a good day. Quirky fact. Apprentices sometimes form informal alliances across trades. You trade scraps of cloth for leftover pastries, or offer to write a letter in exchange for a good knife sharpening. It's a barter economy inside a barter economy, and it makes you feel slightly clever until someone steals your gloves during a prank. You get them back. Eventually. Near the end of your term, you begin crafting your masterpiece, the work that will prove your worth to the guild. It's grueling. You stay up late stitching, folding, perfecting. You mutter curses and prayers in equal measure. And when you finally present it, a miniature merchant's cloak dyed evenly, embroidered subtly, lined with linen so fine it makes Edric squint, you feel something unexpected. Pride. You're not a boy anymore. You're not an assistant or a burden or someone else's project. You're a tradesman in the making. And while the guild still needs to approve it, and Edric still scowls and says, "Could be straighter," you catch him smiling when he thinks you're not looking. Apprenticeship doesn't just teach you a trade, it shapes you, hardens you, carves you into someone who can be trusted with coin, tools, and other people's expectations. It's long, slow, often unfair, but when you walk out of Edric's house 7 years later with calloused hands and a head full of numbers, you know something for sure. You earned this. You've never liked the smell of parchment. It's musty, dry, like old straw left too long in the rain and then baked near a fire. But as you sit on a rough bench inside the grammar school room, surrounded by ink pots, chalk dust, and the unmistakable scent of adolescent fear, you decide you'd rather smell parchment for hours than sheep dung for a lifetime. Because this cramped, echoing room with its Latin chants and stern masters, is your doorway out of oblivion. Or at least into something slightly above it. You're lucky to be here. Very lucky. School in medieval England isn't for everyone, and certainly not for most. It's not required. It's not free. It's not even terribly popular, unless your parents have ambitions for you that go beyond wool, wax or poultry. But your father, bless his calloused fingers and burning pride, has scraped together enough coin and reputation to send you to the local grammar school for a few hours a week. Not full-time, you're no noble, but enough to make you literate in Latin, halfway decent with a quill, and marginally dangerous in a debate about verb tenses. Your school is attached to the local church, naturally. Everything is. The building is old and uneven, with one beam that creaks during lessons like it's sighing in despair along with the students. There are no desks, just benches and boards, and no books except what the master owns. Carefully copied volumes chained to the shelf like prisoners of learning. You bring your wax tablet, a piece of chalk, and a healthy sense of fear. The schoolmaster, Master Alfric, is a man of indeterminate age and infinite scowls. He teaches with a rod in one hand and a psalter in the other, and you suspect he hasn't smiled since the last king died. He's terrifying, but he's also brilliant. His Latin is flawless, his handwriting looks like it was printed by angels, and he can recite Cicero from memory while glaring directly into your soul. Your day begins with prayer, of course, then grammar drills, endless mind-numbing, bone-deep drills, declensions, conjugations, recitations, amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatis, amant. You chant them in unison, like monks who've lost their joy but not their rhythm. Then comes reading, from the Psalms, from the Aeneid, sometimes from long-winded sermons about the dangers of women and dice. You don't ask questions. Unless you want to write lines about the virtue of silence, writing comes later, when your Latin is considered passable. You practice on wax tablets first, scraping your letters slowly, then copying them onto real parchment under the master's scowling supervision. Ink stains your fingers, your tunic, your face. The quills are unreliable, the ink is thick, but when you finally write a complete sentence in clean, balanced script, it feels like conjuring, like building a wall one perfect stone at a time. Most students are boys like you, sons of merchants, priests, guildsmen. A few are clearly here for the church track, hoping to join a monastery or move on to university. They're quieter, more solemn, and always seem to know extra prayers. You're not headed for Oxford, probably not even for higher learning beyond this, but the knowledge, that's yours to keep, and no one can tax it. Yet. The days are long. Lessons run from early morning to late afternoon, with breaks only for meals and prayers. You eat outside, cold bread and harder cheese, shared on a stone bench while you complain about the master's breath and argue about whether verbonus is nominative or accusative. Spoiler, it's nominative. You were wrong. You spent an hour writing. Grammar is the root of virtue 100 times. You quickly learn the real lessons aren't just Latin and logic. They're about hierarchy, discipline, and endurance. You learn how to sit still when your legs ache, how to keep your face blank when Master Alfric announces a pop recitation, how to quietly pass notes without getting caught, usually with jokes about Aristotle and once, a drawing of the schoolmaster as a very unhappy turnip. That got you a week of chores. Worth it. Quirky fact. Some students sneak in charms, little talismans said to bring luck in exams or protection from the rod. One boy swears by a dried rabbit's foot, another ties a red thread around his writing hand. You don't believe in it, but you still carry the little wooden figure your sister carved when you were apprenticed. It's not magic, but it helps. Over time you start to understand the structure of things. Latin begins to click. The rules of logic, if A, then B, not B, therefore not A, settle into your brain like puzzle pieces. You catch errors before they happen. You even win a debate once, arguing that Caesar was a better general than Alexander. Master Alfric disagrees, but admits your reasoning is sound. You glow for a week. Outside school, people treat you differently. Scholar, they call you. Half respectful, half suspicious. You can read signs, translate letters, help your father write contracts. Your handwriting becomes something your neighbours admire. Your opinions, even about fish prices, get listened to a little more closely. Education becomes your secret weapon, sharp and subtle. But school isn't forever. Most boys leave after a year or two once they've learned enough to be useful. Only a few stay on, training for the priesthood or a clerkship in some noble's house. You consider it briefly. The idea of robes, quiet libraries, parchment rooms with windows looking out over orchards. But the shop needs you. Your father's getting older. Your siblings are still young. And besides, you're not sure you could live without the market noise or the smell of freshly dyed wool. Still, the knowledge stays with you, even years later, when you're standing in front of your own apprentice correcting his spelling of Sartor. You feel it. The satisfaction of knowing, of understanding, of being more than a tradesman, of being a thinker, a writer, a man who can quote Horace and calculate profit margins. Scholars today still debate the impact of grammar schools on the emerging middle class. Were they tools of upward mobility, or just instruments of conformity? Did they enlighten or indoctrinate? From where you sit, the answer's simple. They gave you a voice, a sharper mind, a cleaner script, and the ability to write your own future, one careful line at a time. So no, you don't miss the wax-stained bench or the endless chants. But you do miss the feeling of discovery, the quiet thrill of understanding something that once felt impossible. And sometimes, when the shop is closed and the fire is low, you open your old tablet, Run your fingers across the faded letters and whisper to yourself, amo, amas, amat. Because some things never leave you. The rain doesn't stop for 3 weeks. The sky's a wet woolen smear, grey from edge to edge, and your roof leaks in 3 different places you didn't know existed. The cellar floods. The bread goes mouldy. Your sister steps in something you really hope is just mud, and still the rain keeps falling, drumming against windows, pooling in gutters, turning streets into rivers and rivers into hazards. This is the kind of weather that makes saints weep and merchants nervous, because this year the harvests are already late. The rumours started weeks ago. Too much wind, not enough sun, blight in the barley. In good years you eat well. In great years you save. In bad years you tighten your belt and pray. But when 2 bad years come back to back, that's when people start trading boots for bread and muttering about curses again. And you, respectable middle-class merchant though you are not immune. This year was supposed to be a feast year. Business had been good. Cloth moved fast, spices fetched high prices, and your shop, proudly stocked with imported ribbons and local wools, had turned a tidy profit. You had plans, a second storeroom, maybe another apprentice, definitely a new chair to replace the one with the squeaky leg and the nail that keeps catching your tunic. But then the weather turned. The caravan stopped coming, and the price of grain shot up so fast it made your head spin. You try not to panic. You've weathered hard seasons before, but it's different this time. The baker's already warning that flour rations may be halved. The fishmonger's prices have doubled overnight, and yesterday you saw a nobleman's steward buying cabbages from a stall that usually sells to dock workers. When the upper crust starts slumming it, you know it's bad. Your father calls a family meeting, not at the table, at the ledger. He opens the thick book with the reverence of a priest handling scripture. Pages of numbers, dates, names, all lined up in the neat, careful hand your mother taught him years ago. He runs a finger down the most recent entries, frowns and taps the margin. "We'll need to pull from the salted fund," he says. You flinch. The salted fund is for emergencies. Pestilence, plague, fire. Not just rain and nervous customers, but he's right. The profit margins are thinning, and people are buying less cloth and more cheese, so you pivot. You start selling smaller cuts of fabric, remnants. Scrap bundles that look generous but are really your offcuts from last month's overstock. You package them with a cheerful ribbon and call them seamstress specials. They fly off the shelves. Your mother is both impressed and mildly horrified. You also quietly rent out your storage cellar to the spice merchant, who needs somewhere dry for his cinnamon and doesn't ask too many questions about rats. It's not noble work, but it pays. Your wife, ever resourceful, starts trading with the neighbours. A yard of linen for 2 rounds of cheese, a jar of preserved cherries for a basket of eggs. She builds a network of housewives and shopkeepers, all equally desperate, all equally polite about it. There's pride to maintain, even when you're bargaining over pickled beets. Then come the taxes. Of course they do. The Crown doesn't care if the weather's foul. The Church doesn't lower the tithe just because the baker's out of flour. And the Guild, as always, wants its dues on time. You pay because you must. You pay, and then you sit in the dark counting how many meals you can get from 1 salted fish and 3 turnips. It's not a comfortable number. And then the roof collapses. Not all of it. Just the corner over the storeroom. But the timing is cruel. Rain soaks the fabric. Mice scatter. You salvage what you can, dry it by the hearth, and try to pretend it's weather-aged. One customer buys it. Another demands a refund. You give him a discount and offer him a handful of cloves as a peace offering. He accepts. Barely. There's a saying in town, when the nobles tighten belts, the merchants go barefoot. This winter, you learn just how true that is. You stop buying extras. No more sugar, no new boots. You let the servants go early each night, and in exchange you give them hot stew and warm cloaks. It's not enough. But it's something. One of your neighbours, a candlemaker, loses everything. His supplier vanishes. His wax spoils. He sells his tools and moves in with his cousin, a stonemason in another town. You help him pack. You keep his shop sign. You don't know why. Quirky fact. Some people believe lean years are the result of hidden sin. Someone in town not confessing properly, or secretly breaking fast days. A local widow is blamed. Her cat is blamed. Someone hangs a dead chicken over her door to ward off the curse. She curses them back, fluently and with impressive vocabulary. The rain does not stop. But here's the thing about famine years. They teach you to adapt. You learn to stretch everything. Fabric, food, friendships. You learn which debts can be pushed back, which alliances are worth preserving. You learn that dignity is quieter than pride and far more useful. One night you sit by the hearth, your wife beside you, the fire low but steady. You split the last apple. You joke about running off to become minstrels. She laughs, then coughs, then laughs again. You wrap the apple core for tomorrow's stew and say nothing. Scholars still argue whether these years broke the middle class or made them stronger. Some say the instability forced many back into poverty. Others claim the ones who endured rose higher afterward, learning to play the long game. Maybe both are true. Spring comes slowly, like someone testing the water before jumping in. The rain stops, the rivers drop, shoots appear in the fields, the markets begin to stir, not bustling, but breathing. You open your shutters one morning and feel something you haven't felt in months. Hope. It's small, but real. The first cart of barley arrives. The baker reopens with fresh loaves. The fishmonger smiles, which is frankly unsettling. You sell your first full bolt of fabric in weeks. It's coarse and slightly damp, but the customer doesn't care. She's preparing for her daughter's wedding. You close the shop that night with sore feet and a full purse. Not overflowing, but enough. Enough to make stew. Enough to patch the roof. Enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, this year will be better. You go to bed with the window cracked open and listen. No rain. Just quiet. You've never been farther than the edge of town. Not really. Sure, you've walked the length of the market road, maybe crossed the bridge past the mill on a daring spring afternoon, but real travel. That belongs to knights, pilgrims and traders with coin to spare and calluses on their soles. You're a merchant's child, rooted, comfortable, provincial. But then your uncle falls ill 3 towns away, and your father, citing a mix of family duty and you need to learn how the world works, sends you and your brother to deliver a parcel and bring back news. And just like that, you're a traveller. The road out of town smells like mud, manure and wildflowers. It's early, the sun barely up, and the cart you're riding in bumps along like it's got something personal against your spine. You're sharing it with a sack of grain, 3 clay jars of vinegar, and your brother, who won't stop humming. You pass the fields you know. Brother Will's barley, the stony patch no one's managed to farm in 10 years, the crumbling shrine to St. Somebody. But soon even those familiar markers vanish. You're beyond the known. The first inn you stop at is called the Crooked Horn. It lives up to the name. The sign hangs at an angle, the floor is uneven, and the innkeeper's smile is the kind that makes you check your purse 3 times. But the stew is hot, the cider strong, and there's a dog by the fire that growls at anyone who talks too loudly. You like the dog. You do not like the bed, which is lumpy, shared with your brother, and smells faintly of cabbage. You sleep anyway. Travel is slow. Every turn of the wheel brings a new scent, new sights. A roadside shrine decked in ribbons and half-rotted apples. A trio of barefoot monks singing off-key. A field filled with standing stones that someone has carved with cryptic messages in Latin and possibly goat. You meet a woman selling pastries from a basket strapped to a donkey. You buy 2. One tastes like cinnamon and comfort. The other tastes like regret. The next inn is worse. The Stag's End is louder, rowdier, and lit by a fire that smokes like it's plotting something. A group of pilgrims are crowded around the hearth, arguing about relics. One claims to have a splinter from St. Peter's boat. Another swears her necklace belonged to St. Margaret. A third has a vial of holy rainwater that suspiciously smells like gin. You eat your stew in silence and pretend not to notice when someone starts playing a lute badly enough to make the dog howl. On the 3rd day, your cart breaks a wheel. You're halfway between towns, surrounded by open country and the smell of damp earth. While your brother wrestles with the axle and curses the saints by name, you walk a little way off and sit under a tree. You listen. It's quiet. Wind, birds, maybe a distant river. For the first time in your life, you're truly alone. It's terrifying. It's glorious. Eventually, a passing tanner offers help in exchange for a lift to the next village. You agree. He smells like old hides and stories, and you trade your last dried apple for tales about a haunted mill, a fox that speaks in riddles, and a man who once married a goose. You're 90% sure he's lying, but you let him talk. Stories pass the time. When you reach your uncle's town, it's like stepping into a cousin of your own. Similar, but subtly wrong. The streets are narrower, the church taller, the market square, crooked. People talk with a different lilt. They sell different cloth. The baker puts raisins in the bread. Blasphemy. You deliver your parcel, pass along your father's message, and sit with your uncle long enough to feel like a good nephew. He gives you a small tin of honey as thanks. You treasure it like gold. The return journey is harder, you're tired. The roads are muddier. One night you sleep in a hayloft and wake up sneezing so violently your brother accuses you of trying to summon demons. At the Winking Swan, you're served stew that's mostly bones and speculation. At the Red Jug, a fight breaks out over dice, and you both have to flee through the back door while the innkeeper throws a stool at someone's head. You make it home dusty, sore, and full of opinions about other people's cooking. Your mother cries when she sees you. Not much, just a single tear she wipes away with a dishcloth while pretending she's checking your tunic for holes. Your father claps your shoulder like you've returned from the Crusades. You sit by the fire that night drinking weak ale and recounting every bump in the road, every strange encounter, every pastry-related disappointment. Your family laughs, gasps, rolls their eyes. You feel like a bard, a dusty, blistered bard. Quirky fact: some travellers believe that carrying a piece of bread wrapped in linen wards off highwaymen. Your brother did it. You still got robbed. Well, almost. The would-be thief took one look at your cart, sneered, and walked away. Apparently vinegar and raisins aren't high-value targets. Scholars often debate how much medieval middle-class folk travelled. Most stayed put. Life was safer that way. But for merchants, apprentices, and the occasional pilgrim or letter carrier, travel was a necessity. It wasn't glamorous, it was slow, filthy, and often dangerous. But it also broadened the world, opened minds, and occasionally taught you how to curse in 3 dialects. You didn't fall in love on the road. You didn't uncover a lost relic or fight off bandits with a candlestick. But you did leave home, navigate strangers, dodge bedbugs, and return with stories. And now, when customers complain about long deliveries, you smile quietly. Because you know what it's like to stare down a road with nothing ahead but sky, mud, and whatever courage you can stitch together. You keep the tin of honey. You open it once a week and take the smallest spoonful possible, not just because it's rare, but because it tastes like adventure. You hear it before you see it. The metallic scrape of a latch lifting, the soft thud of boots on damp earth, and then the voice, nasal, theatrical, and far too loud for the hour, proclaiming, "She burned the goose." On a Friday, while wearing green. You sigh, put down your spoon, and go to the window. Yes, it's happening again. Your neighbours are fighting. Again. Living in a medieval English town isn't like living in a castle or an isolated farmstead. You're not surrounded by fields or moats or mysterious woods. You're surrounded by people. Lots of them. Loud, nosy, opinionated, cabbage-boiling people. And they all live very, very close to you. Walls are thin, streets are narrow, secrets are non-existent. Welcome to the neighbourhood. Your house, respectable though it is, sits wedged between a cooper and a baker. One smells like beer barrels, the other like burnt flour and frustration. Above you, someone's apprentice seems to practice yodeling every morning. Behind you, there's a chicken coop that has slowly, over the course of years, become a kind of illegal rooster sanctuary. You've complained, no one's listened, and yet you love it, mostly, because your neighbours are the rhythm of your life. You know their footsteps, their curses, their good moods and bad ones. You know who hangs out laundry too early, who eats onions with every meal, and who's been secretly meeting the fishmonger's son behind the chapel. Everyone knows. Gossip flows through the town faster than the river. It's your social network, your safety net, and your daily entertainment, equal parts survival and sport. Your closest neighbour is Mistress Blythe, the baker's wife. She has a voice like a church bell and a temper like boiling milk. She runs her kitchen with military precision and believes strongly in the power of public shame. Her current campaign, forcing the cooper to fix his sagging fence. She's taken to hanging laundry on it until he gets the message. You respect her strategy. Next to her lives Thomas the candlemaker, a quiet man with nervous eyes and a wax-stained apron, who once accidentally started a fire and now lives in permanent fear of sparrows. His candles are excellent. His social skills are not, but you like him. He gives you discounts and occasionally shares almond pastries that his sister smuggles in from Coventry. Across the way is a widow named Elin, who claims to be 45 but has memories that go back to before the current king was born. She knows everyone's business, everyone's debts, and everyone's embarrassing childhood nicknames. You once asked how she knows so much. She just tapped her broom and said, "No one notices a woman sweeping." You've never underestimated her since. But neighbourhood life isn't all intrigue and baked goods. There are rules, unwritten, fiercely enforced. You sweep your step every morning. You don't toss waste into the street after the bell tolls. You keep your shutters clean and your dog quiet. You don't sing too loudly after curfew, and you definitely don't wear red and green together unless you're asking for attention. One time, your brother did just that, and was serenaded with a folk ballad about his fashion sense for an entire week. He learned, slowly. Every day is a delicate dance of cooperation and complaint. You lend tools, you trade favours, you share a jug of cider on warm evenings, and argue over who trampled the herb garden during the midsummer procession. It was your uncle. He denies it. When someone falls ill, food appears at their door. When someone gives birth, gifts show up in baskets, blankets, bread, a carved spoon. And when someone dies, the entire street goes quiet. Not because they were loved necessarily, but because death is everyone's business. Quirky fact, there's a neighbourhood tradition. If someone's goat escapes 3 times in a season, they owe their closest neighbours a meat pie. No one knows where this rule came from, but it's been enforced so religiously that one woman once painted spots on her goat and claimed it belonged to someone else. It didn't work. The pie was delicious. But with the closeness comes friction, noise, smells, opinions. The cooper's son plays the flute like it's a form of protest. The fish vendor dumps his leftover brine too close to the well, and every Thursday a man from 2 streets over walks through your alley, humming a song so filthy it once made your mother gasp and drop her sewing. You've started humming it too, quietly. Still, in a world where danger is real, fires, thieves, sickness, it's your neighbours who have your back. When your chimney caught fire last year, the entire street formed a bucket line before the bell even rang. When your wife sprained her ankle, it was Mistress Blythe who brought herbs and a poultice. When your servant ran off with half your silver, it was Elin who found him 2 towns over. She never said how. You didn't ask. Even the town watch depends on neighbour reports. No one has time to patrol every alley, so the people do it themselves. If someone's acting strange, everyone knows. If a stranger loiters too long, eyebrows are raised. If a cart rolls in after dark without a licence, there's whispering before the wheels stop turning. In some ways, it's oppressive. In others, protective. Some scholars call medieval neighbourhoods organic security systems, where the lack of privacy was offset by the certainty of witness. Others argue they were pressure cookers of resentment, breeding jealousy, rivalry, and the occasional goat theft. Probably both. Certainly both. Tonight, as the sun sets, and the street glows with lantern light and the smell of stew, you step outside with a broom in hand and nod to your neighbours. Thomas waves with a waxy hand. Mistress Blythe grunts approval at your clean doorstep. Elin just squints at your shoes and says, "You've grown." You sweep the cobblestones, listen to the night noises, the crackle of hearths, the low hum of gossip, and feel, for the 100th time, that this little knot of buildings and people and peculiar habits is not just where you live, it's who you are. And when someone 2 houses down starts singing that filthy song again, you smile, just a little. Home. The boy's been caught stealing again. He's maybe 9, maybe 11. Age is fluid in this town unless you're on a tax roll. And he's standing in the square with a crust of bread in one hand and his other clenched into a fist like it might help him punch his way out of this. The baker is yelling. The baker always yells. The constable is approaching slowly, with the bored gait of someone who knows exactly how this will end and doesn't feel like rushing to it. The crowd is gathering. Of course it is. No one here minds a bit of public spectacle, especially when there's the chance of someone falling in a puddle or losing their dignity to a slap with a fish. You've seen it before. Petty theft, public punishment. It's part of town life, woven into the rhythm of market days and gossip. As a merchant, you're not above the law, but you're certainly not under it. When a boy steals from a stall, it's disruption. When someone shortchanges a merchant like you, that's fraud. That's different. That's serious. And yet here you are, watching a child who's probably hungry enough to eat the leather off his own shoes being prepared for judgment over a stale hunk of rye. The baker demands compensation. The constable shrugs. The boy spits. Not a great move. Public sentiment is officially off the table. He gets dragged to the stocks. They're right there in the centre of the square, an unmissable wooden monument to poor choices and public accountability. Everyone in town knows them. Some people fear them. Others treat them like street furniture with a bit more bite. You've seen everything from drunkards to slanderers locked in them. One time, a priest who said the mayor's wife had ankles like undercooked hams spent 2 hours with his head and hands trapped while someone sold turnips next to him. He's never commented on ankles again. Stocks aren't the worst punishment, of course. There's public flogging, branding, banishment, or even death. Though the last is rare and generally reserved for murderers, traitors, or people who steal from the church does not forgive theft, especially not of wine. There was an incident last year. No one talks about it anymore. The stains never came out of the altar cloth. For minor crimes like theft, insults, or even fighting in public, punishments are meant to be humiliating rather than brutal. That's the theory anyway. In practice, humiliation can sting for a lifetime. You've seen people jeer, throw mud, even toss spoiled fruit. Some towns go farther. There are places where wrongdoers are paraded through the streets wearing signs describing their offence in rhyming verse. One woman had to wear a cap with feathers stuck in it for speaking ill of God and geese. You still hum the tune someone made about her. But crime in a medieval town isn't just about punishment, it's about presence. Justice is public, visible, and unmistakably performative. There are no detectives, no trials with powdered wigs, no quiet backroom deals. Well, not officially. There's the hue and cry. If someone sees a crime, they must shout and chase. If they don't, they can be fined. It's a beautiful system of mutual fear. Your own dealings with justice have been fortunately limited. A dispute with a dishonest dyer once went before the town court. You presented your evidence, badly dyed cloth, a customer's complaint, and a sample that looked more like algae than green. The court, consisting of the mayor, 2 aldermen, and a notary with an ink-stained nose, ruled in your favour. The dyer paid a fine. You got a nod of approval. The system, on that day, worked. But not everyone has your resources. The poor rarely win their cases. They can't afford fines. They don't have witnesses willing to risk guild politics or church disapproval. They steal, they're punished, and the cycle repeats. It's not fair. But fairness, in this world, is a luxury. Theft, as it turns out, isn't the only crime worth a public show. Gossip, if it crosses into slander, can be punished with a ducking stool. You've watched that too. The accused strapped into a chair, dunked repeatedly in the town pond until they confess or shiver into silence. It's not justice, it's theatre. You hate how fascinated you are by it. Quirky fact, in your town the stocks were once temporarily used to restrain a sheep that kept headbutting the miller. It became something of a town mascot. People fed it apples. A minstrel wrote a song. The sheep got more sympathy than most thieves, and then there are the quiet crimes. Things that should be punished but rarely are. Bribery, market manipulation, selling watered wine, using false weights. These offences are more complicated. They require proof, they require influence, and they often end with nothing more than a stern word or a sharply raised eyebrow from the guildmaster. Because everyone knows that merchants with clean hands are either saints or liars. Still, you keep your records clean, you don't cheat your customers, and when someone does try to pass off counterfeit coin in your shop, you catch it, you speak with the constable, you handle it, quietly, discreetly, because punishment may be public, but reputation is personal. Scholars debate the effectiveness of medieval justice. Was it harsh? Certainly. Arbitrary? Often. But it was also swift, visible, and local. You couldn't hide from your community, and your community wouldn't let you forget. Tonight, the boy is released after 2 hours. No flogging, no fine, just sore joints, a bruised ego, and the knowledge that he'll be watched. The baker grumbles. The crowd disperses. You step inside your shop, close the shutters, and look at your own ledgers. Clean for now. But you wonder, what drives a boy to steal stale bread? What makes justice just? And who, in this town of saints and sinners, has never bent a rule, whispered a lie, cut a corner? You don't have answers, just questions and a memory of the stocks creaking under the weight of a child's silence, and the quiet certainty that justice, like bread, goes stale if no one watches how it's made. You're 35 now, which in medieval England puts you squarely in the category of middle-aged, though the aches in your knees and the way your back complains every time you lift a crate say otherwise. 35 is when you stop getting described as young and start getting described as seasoned, experienced, or, if your rivals are being polite but cutting, set in your ways. You are, by all reasonable accounts, successful. You own a shop, you have apprentices, You have a decent pair of boots and a wool cloak that doesn't smell like wet dog. And yet, there's something gnawing at you lately. A quiet, unshaped feeling that settles into your bones when the market closes and the hearth glows too dim. You start asking questions you don't usually allow room for. Is this it? Have I peaked? Would my life be different if I'd run away with that travelling minstrel troupe that passed through 5 years ago? You didn't even like the music. But still, what if? It's not a crisis exactly. It's more like restlessness with a side of melancholy. You catch yourself lingering in the back room, staring at the same bolt of cloth you've sold for 15 years, wondering if it's really the shade of blue that makes people happy or if everyone's just pretending. You start buying more expensive ink for your ledgers, hoping the deeper colour will make the numbers feel more meaningful. It doesn't. Your wife notices before you say a word. Of course she does. She's smarter than you, quicker, and has a particular talent for reading your moods like a weather chart. She starts handing you chores outside the shop, long errands to the next town over, inventory trips that could be done by apprentices. You grumble, but she insists. She knows what she's doing. You need movement. One day, you walk 3 miles just to check on a shipment of beeswax that was supposed to arrive last week. It hasn't. Of course it hasn't. But you stand there at the edge of the road, boots muddy, sky the colour of dull pewter, and feel a strange lightness. You're nowhere near your shop. No one's asking you questions, and you remember, suddenly, how it felt to be 17, and convinced the world had corners you hadn't turned yet. You run into an old friend on the way back, Oswin, now a travelling merchant, half bald and still wearing that ridiculous feathered cap he loved in your youth. He tells stories over cider in a roadside inn, riots in Calais, storms near the Channel, a baker in Bruges who swears he once sold a loaf to the Pope. You laugh, harder than you have in weeks, and for the first time in a long while, you don't feel like a shopkeeper. You feel like a person again. But the feeling doesn't last. You return home, unload your satchel, and find the same ledgers, the same dust, the same creaky floorboard in the back room that has never once let you sneak past it. Life resumes. The only difference is that now, when you close the shop at sundown, you find yourself staring a little longer at the stars, wondering how far they really are. Your mother starts nudging you toward church more often. You're not getting any younger, she says, as if age is something you misplace. The priest gives you longer looks, peppered with suggestions about pilgrimages or donations. You hear the word legacy more often. You start thinking about your father, how he seemed so certain at this age, even when things were falling apart. Then again, maybe he was faking it too. Maybe you're all just pretending to know what you're doing. Quirky fact, there's a merchant in York who, upon turning 35, sold all his belongings and became a beekeeping hermit in the woods. People still talk about him like he's a legend. You don't want to be a beekeeper, but sometimes when the shop's too quiet, the idea of disappearing has a certain charm. One night your apprentice asks if you've ever wanted to leave. You're surprised by the question. He's young, ambitious, already halfway convinced he'll open his own shop someday and make twice what you do. You start to say no, but stop. Then slowly you say, yes. He looks at you like you've admitted to eating frogs. You laugh and tell him the truth. Wanting to leave doesn't mean you should. It just means you're still thinking, he nods. Then asks for a day off. Of course he does. Scholars often skip over this stage of medieval life, the midlife simmer. They focus on youth and old age, apprentices and patriarchs. But this part, the in-between, where you have stability but not certainty, is where most people live. Quiet discontent, mild dreams, occasional flashes of the old ambition that catch you off guard while stirring the stew. You write more letters now. Not many, just a few, sent with passing travellers to people you haven't seen in years. You hear back from one, an old guildmate who moved to Norwich and now runs a shop half the size of yours and is completely, aggressively happy about it. He invites you to visit. You're considering it. You also start writing in your own hand, not just for business, but for yourself. A line here, a list there. Things I haven't done. Things I thought I'd be. It's not dramatic. It's not even legible some days. But it helps. You tuck the pages into your ledger. Like secrets. Like a map that maybe you'll use later. And then, one morning, you wake up to sunlight through the shutters, the smell of fresh bread from next door, and your wife humming as she folds a tunic you'd forgotten you owned. You stretch, rise, and step outside to open the shop. The wood creaks. The bell above the door rings the same way it always has, and you realise you feel fine. Not euphoric, not young, but steady. You're still here, still learning, still thinking, and sometimes that's enough. Your wife stands at the shop counter, arms crossed, brow furrowed, lips pursed with that terrifying focus she gets right before she discovers something you've overlooked. Again, you've just finished unloading 3 bolts of linen, and you're halfway through explaining why the invoice is short by 1 when she raises an eyebrow and says, "You didn't count the damaged bundle, did you?" And just like that, you remember. Of course, the rat-chewed corner, and you're standing there with the kind of smile that says, "Please don't notice I'm making this up as I go." She notices. She always notices. You're not embarrassed. Well, you are a little embarrassed. But mostly, you're used to this. Because while your name is the one painted neatly above the shop door, everyone in the neighbourhood knows the truth. This place runs because she runs it. Not in a grand, sweeping, chest-puffing way. No, it's subtler than that. Quiet, precise, efficient, ruthless when needed. You sell fabric, she sells the experience, and no one haggles with her twice. Back when you married, you thought you were getting a wife who'd manage the house and maybe help with some inventory. What you actually got was a woman who could calculate profit margins in her head while nursing a child and organising a church feast. She doesn't do accounts on occasion. She owns the ledger. She doesn't oversee the apprentices. They are terrified of her, and rightfully so. She once reduced a boy to tears simply by refolding his display with too much grace. In a town where most women are expected to be background characters, quiet, domestic, helpful but not in charge, your wife stands out. But she does it without ever quite breaking the rules. She doesn't wear garish colours. She doesn't speak over men in public meetings. But when she steps into the market square, tradesmen part like she's royalty, and the fishmonger tries very, very hard to act like his scales are always clean. She handles the customers who frustrate you, the indecisive ones, the ones who want just a little more off the price, or something softer but still durable, but also cheap but still stylish. You would argue, she smiles. And somehow they leave with a full order, a thank you on their lips, and a vague sense that they may have just been outmanoeuvred. Sometimes, when she's working, she sings. Not loudly, not for show, just softly while folding or measuring, a song her mother taught her about a sailor and a jealous moon. You never ask what it means, you just listen. Women in trades are technically not supposed to be masters in your town. The guild rules are very clear. Only men can hold voting rights, own tools under charter, or sit on panels. But reality laughs at rules. Half the guildmasters' wives manage their husbands' affairs. Some widows even run businesses in their own names, if they're well connected or feared enough. And then there are the quiet partnerships. Husband and wife teams where the paperwork may say him, but the cash flow says her. Scholars debate how involved medieval women really were in business. Some argue they were pushed out of trades by guild restrictions. Others point to account books, wills, and court cases showing women negotiating contracts, employing servants, and even training apprentices. You don't need parchment proof. You just have to watch your wife balance a ledger while correcting your apprentice's Latin and planning a dinner for 12. Quirky fact. There's a superstition in town that women shouldn't measure fabric on feast days, or the cloth will rot before it's sold. Your wife ignores this completely. She once cut and sold 6 bolts of velvet on All Saints' Day just to spite the rumour. The cloth? Perfect. The rumour? Still alive. You suspect she likes that part more. The apprentices fear her in a respectful, devotional way. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Her disappointment alone could flatten a grown man. She's the reason deliveries are never late. The shop never runs out of candles and the ink is always freshly mixed. You once tried to do it all yourself for a week while she was sick. You still have nightmares. When she does take time for herself, it's usually spent reading. Yes, reading. Or embroidering tiny, absurdly intricate scenes into handkerchiefs that she gives away and pretends not to care about. One features a goose wearing a crown. Another shows a merchant being chased by a duck. You suspect they're based on real people. She's no saint. She glares. She grumbles. She throws spoons. She once accidentally spilled wine on a noblewoman's shoes for insulting your daughter's hands, and she has very strong opinions about taxes, which she delivers loudly with diagrams during dinner. But she's your partner, your equal, possibly your superior. And when you catch her staring out the shop window, watching the market square like a general surveying a battlefield, you realise something. You're not the only one with dreams. She may not speak them aloud, but they're there, in the way she lingers by maps, in the way she watches the travelling carts, in the letters she tucks into her apron and rereads when she thinks no one's looking. Sometimes you talk, late at night, when the shutters are closed and the fire is low, about what you'll do when the children are grown, about taking a trip, just the two of you, maybe to York, maybe beyond, maybe even to the coast. She's never seen the sea. You tell her you'll take her someday. She doesn't say anything, just smiles and folds a handkerchief. You fall asleep thinking about waves and salt and gulls, and about the woman beside you, who could run a shop, raise a family and balance a kingdom if someone just handed her the keys. The roof is leaking again, a slow, deliberate drip that taps into a wooden bucket near the hearth, like it's mocking your very existence. Your youngest is sick with a cough that sounds like a goat gargling gravel, and the potboy has broken yet another spoon. But none of that matters right now, because you're holding a letter from the Reeves office, sealed with red wax and stuffed full of dread. It's time to pay the tithe. Now you knew it was coming, it always comes, like taxes, toothaches, and that one neighbour who plays the hurdy-gurdy at dawn on holy days. But that doesn't make it sting any less. The tithe is the church's due, a tenth of your earnings in coin or in goods. Doesn't matter if you made a profit. Doesn't matter if you sold less this quarter. The church wants its slice of the pie, and then the king and the guild want theirs too. By the time everyone's taken their share, you're left wondering how you managed to own a business and still feel like a very well-dressed beggar. Your wife reads the letter over your shoulder and mutters something that's definitely not in the Bible. You both know the drill. You'll tally the year's sales, fudge the less flattering bits ever so slightly, and offer up your voluntary contribution before anyone knocks on your door. Because if you delay, they'll come knocking, and nothing ruins a peaceful supper like a church official asking about unpaid dues with 2 scribes in tow and a notebook full of guilt. So you go to the coffer, unlock it with the iron key you hide behind the flour barrel, and begin counting. The coins clink like judgment. A few silver, some bronze, a couple of foreign bits that no one accepts but you keep anyway because they look impressive. It's not a fortune, not this year, but it will do. And then there's the toll. Travelling merchants like yourself, even if you only venture 2 towns over, have to pay road tolls. You've lost track of how many. There's a toll at the bridge, a toll at the crossroads, a toll at the gate. You half expect someone to start charging you for breathing on the high road. If you ask why the toll is so high, the collector shrugs and says something about repairs, though the bridge still has the same hole from last spring. Once, you tried to keep a written record of every toll paid in a year. You stopped at 52 and poured yourself something strong. And just when you think the week couldn't get more expensive, your eldest clutches their jaw and says, "It hurts." You know what that means. You hope it means they bit into a walnut too hard. But no, it's worse, it's the tooth. Medieval dental care is not so much care as it is exorcism with pliers. You call for the local barber surgeon, an enthusiastic man with hands like shovels and a wildly optimistic view of pain management. He arrives carrying a bag that smells like vinegar and regret. He examines your child's mouth, nods solemnly and says, "We'll need to pull it." You ask if there's an alternative. He laughs. You pay him, more than you expected as always, and watch as your brave, foolish child sits in a chair with a rag to bite down on. There's no magic, no sleeping draught, just a firm grip and a prayer. The yank is swift. The scream is worse. The tooth comes out bloody, cracked and triumphant. The barber holds it up like a trophy. You do not applaud. Your wife hands your child a sugared plum, which in retrospect feels slightly ironic. But the tooth is gone. The pain will pass, and now you're down 1 more coin and up 1 less tooth. Quirky fact: some people believe that if you bury a tooth at a crossroads, it will keep evil spirits from following you home. Your child insists on doing just that. You oblige. You're not superstitious, but honestly at this point it can't hurt. Later that week, the guild holds its quarterly inspection. Another kind of toll, though this one comes dressed in velvet and pretends to care about your standards. A visiting master walks through your shop, fingers the cloth, sniffs at the dye, nods at the accounts. He doesn't find fault. He also doesn't compliment anything. You still have to give him a bottle of your best wine as a token of good business, which is code for pay up or we'll find something to complain about next time. Your apprentice watches all of this wide-eyed, probably imagining that one day he'll be the one swanning around sniffing at cloth. You don't have the heart to tell him that even guildmasters still pay taxes, still bribe scribes, and still get surprise visits from the bishop's inspector when their ledgers are a day late. Scholars argue whether medieval taxation was excessive or merely inconsistent. Some point out that middle-class folk like you still lived better than peasants. Others say the burden of tithes and tolls was designed to keep your class from getting too comfortable. God forbid a merchant start dreaming of nobility. You tend to agree with both. Yes, you're better off. No, you're not free. It's like climbing a ladder that never ends, except the higher you go, the more hands reach into your pockets. By Sunday, the books are balanced, the tooth is healing, and your child proudly informs everyone at church that the devil cannot follow them anymore because they buried their pain at a crossroads. The priest looks vaguely concerned. You just nod. You drop your coin into the collection plate. You smile at the reeve. You thank the toll collector. You tip the barber. And then you go home, sit by the hearth, and try not to think about how many spoons you'll have to sell before winter. Just another week in paradise. The child won't stop asking questions. Not rude ones, not the kind that get you shushed in church, but the endless, meandering, slightly magical kind that only a 7-year-old can ask with a straight face. Why do chickens bob when they walk? Do clouds have bones? If I eat too much jam, will I turn into jam? You're trying to tally the shop's monthly figures, but every 5 minutes a new question crashes into your concentration like a runaway cart.
It's frustrating. It's hilarious. And if you're honest, it's kind of beautiful. Because children in your world aren't supposed to have time for wonder. Childhood, as most people understand it now, doesn't really exist yet. Not as a protected, playful stage. The moment a child can walk and carry something, they're given jobs. Sweep the floor, fetch water, watch the chickens, scrub the chamber pot. Childhood is short, practical, and deeply undervalued by the world around it. And yet, somehow, this little voice keeps showing up next to your workbench asking if you think ghosts can wear shoes. You didn't think you'd be sentimental about parenting. When your first was born, you mostly remember being tired and terrified. Tired from the sleepless nights, terrified you'd drop the baby or feed it something wrong or accidentally raise a thief. But now you know the rhythms. You've been through fevers, nightmares, tantrums, sudden silences that always precede something broken. And more than that, you've learned how to enjoy it. Your middle child has taken up wood carving. Badly. Every other day you find a pile of shavings and something that looks like a very abstract horse. You praise them anyway. They glow. Then immediately ask if they can carve the bread knife. You say no. Firmly. Twice. Your eldest, nearing adulthood, is already apprenticing at a neighboring shop. They return each day with new facts about accounts, new ways to polish leather, and very strong opinions about how you run your business. That's not how Mistress Jana does it, they say, eyebrows raised. You nod and say, well, when Mistress Jana pays your dowry, you can do it her way. They roll their eyes. You grin. Parenthood in your world is messy, exhausting, and so constant it's hard to see it clearly, until one day you look down and realize the baby who couldn't keep porridge out of their hair is now helping you calculate profits and arguing about trade routes. There's no manual. There are no parenting scrolls passed down from wise scholars. You rely on instincts, your spouse's sharper instincts, and the occasional advice from neighbors, most of which boils down to keep them fed and away from the well. You worry, though, about everything, about the world they're growing into, about the price of barley, about the rumors of plague in the south, about whether they'll be able to read, write, trade, marry well, live long, whether they'll ever know anything beyond this town, whether that's even a bad thing. Quirky fact, in your town, there's a belief that if a child sneezes 3 times in a row, they've seen an angel. Your youngest sneezed 4 times last week, then said the angel had a hat shaped like a duck. You made a note to limit the honey cakes before bedtime. Your wife, ever practical, teaches them useful things. How to knead bread without ruining it. How to spot good fabric from bad by touch alone. How to spot a liar by watching their feet. People's mouths lie, she says, but their toes panic. You believe her. You, meanwhile, teach them numbers, letters, and how to avoid being swindled by a spice trader who insists his pepper is blessed. Some people in town say children should be seen and not heard. That curiosity is dangerous. That discipline is everything. You try to nod politely when they say things like that. Then go home and listen to your youngest reenact the goose fight from the market using 2 potatoes and a scrap of ribbon. Because in a world where danger is real and the future is never guaranteed, their imagination is a kind of rebellion. A soft, chaotic rebellion that turns chamber pots into ships and market stalls into castles. A reminder that there's still room for stories, for dreaming, for making loud farting noises at dinner and pretending it was the dog. Scholars tend to skip over the inner lives of children in the medieval middle class. Records are scarce. Voices are missing. But in the margins of old manuscripts, there are doodles, tiny knights fighting snails, cats with swords, rude faces with exaggerated noses. You wonder if, centuries from now, someone will find one of your child's wooden horse abominations and try to guess what it meant. Probably nothing. Probably everything. You tell them stories at night. Sometimes made-up ones, sometimes borrowed from the saints, sometimes just dramatic retellings of the time the cat got stuck in the chimney. They listen like it's scripture. Then they ask questions. What happened after? Did the cat ever go to sea? Could I be a knight if I practiced enough and got taller? You never say no outright. That's the secret. You offer maybe. You offer if you work hard. You offer a tiny window to the possible, even if you know most children don't grow up to fight dragons or become saints. Because hope, even in this world, especially in this world, is necessary. And when they fall asleep, mouth open, arms flung wide like they've just wrestled the stars, you feel something heavy and soft settle into your chest. Love, yes. But also, fear. The sharp kind. Because now there's more at stake. You're not just running a business. You're shaping people. Small, sponge-brained, wildly chaotic people who will grow up and carry bits of you with them. The good bits. And probably the weird bits, too. You look at them curled under their rough wool blanket and you think, let the tolls come. Let the roof leak. Let the price of vinegar rise again. You'll handle it. Because this noisy, joyful, sticky, ridiculous life you've built, it's worth protecting. The sky has been threatening to snow all day, and now, just as you step outside to check the firewood, it finally gives in. Quiet, slow flakes drifting down like crumbs from some celestial table. The air smells sharp, almost metallic, and the ground crunches underfoot with last night's frost. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and mutter to yourself that you should have patched that loose seam 3 weeks ago. You didn't. And now your neck is cold. Naturally. Winter in your town doesn't arrive with drama. It creeps in gradually, soaking into the corners of windows, stiffening boots, slowing everything down to a crawl. Days shrink, nights stretch like long, dark yawns, and the hearth becomes the center of your world. Business slows too. No one wants to haggle over cloth when their fingers are frozen stiff. And the deliveries? Forget it. Wagons get stuck in the mud, carts lose wheels, and messengers go mysteriously missing, only to return a week later looking deeply traumatized and mumbling about wolves. You prepare as best you can. The salted meat is hung in the pantry, the apples are stored in straw-filled crates, and your wife has quietly declared that no one is touching the spice chest unless it's Christmas, or the Lord himself shows up for supper. You don't argue. She once tackled a man over cinnamon. You've seen things. Inside, life becomes smaller, tighter, more intimate. The children spend their days by the hearth, carving, sewing, pestering each other, and inventing elaborate games that mostly involve shouting and throwing things. You pretend to disapprove, but secretly you're glad they're occupied. Their laughter helps drown out the creaking of the house settling into its winter bones. Your apprentice is miserable, of course. He still has to fetch water, clear snow from the doorway, and run errands across town, none of which are improved by the weather. He complains loudly and frequently, which earns him a raised eyebrow from your wife and a lecture about how she used to carry buckets through blizzards uphill both ways with a goat under one arm and a baby under the other. He doesn't believe her. You don't argue. She probably did. Winter brings out a strange kind of honesty in people. The cold strips away pretense. You find yourself having longer conversations with neighbors you usually only nod at. A shared mug of ale by the fire becomes a deep discussion about God, fate, or why geese are inherently evil. People open up. They confess things in the quiet, firelit hush. Small secrets, buried regrets, ridiculous hopes for spring. It's oddly comforting. Your shop still opens most days, though not for long. You sell what you can. Wool sells well. Everyone wants warmth. You bundle smaller cuts into hearth packs, which your wife insists on naming things like Snow Day Blues and Saint Knit Surprise. You think the names are ridiculous. They sell out by noon. She wins. Quirky fact. In your town, there's a superstition that if you sleep with a rosemary sprig under your pillow on the winter solstice, you'll dream of your future self. You try it. You dream of ducks. No further insight is gained. Winter is also when repairs finally happen. The slow, dull work you never have time for in busier seasons. You replaster a wall. You mend a chair that's been wobbling since last Easter. You finally fix that loose roof tile with a quiet sense of triumph and promptly fall off the ladder. Your wife laughs. You bruise your dignity. But it's not all cozy hearths and domestic drama. Winter has its dangers. Illness creeps through town like smoke. Someone's child dies of fever. The blacksmith's apprentice loses 2 fingers to frostbite. A poor family is found huddled in an abandoned stall, barely alive. You help where you can. Everyone does. The wealthier families donate fuel, food, cloaks. You spare a bag of dried apples and a half-used bolt of wool. It's not charity. It's survival insurance. In a town like this, no one truly survives alone. The church holds extra services, mostly to keep people hopeful, or at least distracted. The priest gives impassioned sermons about light in darkness, renewal in hardship, and how the snow reflects God's mercy. You're not sure about the theology, but the warm church is nice and the songs are pretty. One evening, deep into December, you host a feast, not a grand affair, just stew, bread, root vegetables roasted in butter, and a few sticky pears preserved from autumn. You invite the neighbors. You play music. Your youngest performs a dramatic monologue as a tree. No one knows why. Everyone claps. Your wife produces her secret stash of ginger. People weep openly. And then comes Christmas. It's not the glitzy, gift-heavy celebration people know today. It's simpler. Religious, yes, but also deeply personal. A celebration of surviving another year, of making it through hardship, of still being here, together. You attend Mass at midnight, wrapped in every layer you own. You sing until your throat hurts. You return home under a sky so clear it feels holy. The stars don't twinkle. They burn. On Christmas morning, the children wake early and race down to the hearth where their gifts await. A carved toy horse, a new scarf, a sack of sugared almonds. Their delight is immediate, loud, and messy. You sip your ale, bleary-eyed, and wonder how your father ever handled all this. You understand now why he always looked exhausted by the second bowl of porridge. But winter isn't all stillness. It forces you to think about the year that's ending, about what you've done, what you haven't, about what you'd change if spring came early and handed you a fresh start. You look around your warm home, at the flickering fire, the laughter, the crumbs on the table, and feel both proud and uneasy. Proud because you built this. Uneasy because you know how fragile it is. One fire, one sickness, one cruel winter too many. You don't dwell on that thought for long. You pour yourself another drink, throw another log on the fire, and lean back into the warmth of the room. Outside, the snow falls steadily. Inside, there's bread, music, and the stubborn, sweet joy of being alive when so many things are not. You survived another winter, and that, in your world, is worth celebrating. The road out of town looks different when you're not running errands or chasing down missing wax deliveries. Today, you're walking it for no one but yourself. It's early spring, the kind where the ground is still hard, but the air carries hints of warmth and wet soil and that unnameable smell that makes you think maybe, just maybe, you've made it. A few green shoots poke up from the roadside ditches, reckless and hopeful. Somewhere behind you, your shop is opening without you. Your eldest is handling the ledgers. Your apprentice is, hopefully, not lighting anything on fire. You left instructions. You left warning looks. You left. Because today is for you. You don't know what you're looking for. Not really. You just know it's not inside the shop, not at the market, not in the folded pages of your ledger. It's out here, somewhere between the hills and the hedges, in the places where no one expects to find anything valuable. You pass a field where someone set scarecrows that are far too lifelike. One has a hat, one has eyebrows. You nod at them out of habit. The second one seems to nod back. That's fine. You're not questioning anything today. The sun peeks out for a moment, casting long shadows that make the road feel longer, wider, older. You stop by a broken wall, maybe once a barn, maybe something older, and sit. It's not dramatic. You just sit and listen. There are birds. The distant clink of a cow's bell. Wind that tugs at your cloak like a child asking for attention. And for a brief, blessed moment, there's nothing you have to do. No customer to flatter, no child to feed, no guild tax to calculate. Just you, the stone beneath you, and the sky above you doing its best impression of kindness. You think about the past, about your father's voice in the early mornings, barking at chickens and humming the wrong hymns, about your mother bent over the fire, her hands always busy, always dry, about your wife, standing in the doorway years ago with that look that said, "If you marry me, your life will never be tidy again." You think of your children, their ridiculous songs, their endless questions, the way they keep growing like weeds you forgot to pull. You think of your apprentices, their clumsy hands, their sincere mistakes. You think, I've done things, real things, not grand, but real. You didn't change the kingdom. You didn't get rich. You didn't marry into nobility or become a knight or invent a better way to carry flour uphill. But you kept people warm. You fed mouths. You measured cloth for wedding dresses, burial shrouds, cradle blankets. You made a living. You made a life. There's a strange power in that. Quirky fact. There's a traveling preacher who once declared that every honest shopkeeper would get a private corner of heaven, complete with warm bread and tax-free wine. People laughed. You didn't. You think that sounds just about right. You start walking again. The next village is only a mile away, and they've got a spring fair setting up, colorful cloth, meat pies that may or may not contain pigeon, and a juggler who's clearly doing this as a backup career. You wander through it all, not as a merchant, but as a man. No haggling, no sales, just watching. You see a girl try to steal an apple and get caught. The vendor just winks and gives her two. You see a young couple awkwardly holding hands, bumping into everything. You see a woman selling wool who reminds you so much of your mother it stops you cold. You buy a meat pie. It is definitely 30% pigeon. Back home, your wife will be wondering where you are. Not worried, just aware. She always knows when you're thinking too loudly. You'll go back soon, tell her about the fair, the juggler, the nodding scarecrow, the pie. She'll listen. She'll mock you gently. She'll tuck a loose hair behind your ear while pretending not to. On the way back, you take a longer route, past the fields, past the river, past the mill with the ever-leaning door. You pass a boy fishing with a stick and a piece of string, and you remember a version of yourself who once did the same, convinced he could catch something bigger than the world if he just waited long enough. You pass a small chapel built out of stones too round for building but used anyway. There's a bench out front. You sit. You stay until the sun starts to dip. You don't have a great revelation, No angel descends, no stranger gives you a coin with secret meaning. Just the wind, and the quiet, and the realization that all these years you spent trying to build something, to prove something, you were already in it, living it. You head home. The town welcomes you like a warm coat. The shop's still standing. The apprentices look guilty but not panicked. Your wife kisses your cheek and tells you dinner's in the pot. Your youngest runs in with a wooden duck wearing a cape and declares it a hero goose. You laugh until your stomach aches. That night, by the fire, you pull out your old ledger and begin a new page. Not for numbers, not for taxes, just for you. You write, slowly, carefully. Today I walked, I remembered. I felt the weight of the world and found it not so heavy after all. Then you close the book, not forever, just for now. So here you are. The fire's burned low, just embers now, a soft orange flicker casting long, sleepy shadows across the room. Outside, the town has gone still. No shouting, no carts, no bells, just the creak of beams settling and the far-off hoot of an owl that sounds vaguely annoyed to still be working this late. You lean back in your chair, the same one with the wobble you never got around to fixing. There's a half mug of cider on the table, a bit too warm, a bit too flat. But it's yours, and that counts. You think about everything you've seen, everything you've been. The middle class in medieval England never got the grand songs. You weren't born with titles, you didn't die with epic poems carved into stone. But you were the thread that stitched the world together. The tanners, the coopers, the cloth sellers and bakers and glassmakers and scribes. You worked, you argued, you endured. You made a life out of thin coin and thick walls and stubborn love. And maybe it wasn't glorious, maybe it wasn't fair, but it was yours. You rest your eyes for a moment. Just a moment. The fire hums quietly. The world spins on. And you think with the last quiet flicker of the night that maybe, just maybe, you did all right after all.